This contract will destroy you." Lena's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Every head in the restaurant turned. Adrian Volkov's pen stopped 1 inch above the signature line. Marcus Hale's face went white. And the most feared man in Chicago looked up from a $100 million contract to stare at a waitress holding a coffee pot. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And that was the moment everything changed. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Lena's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The rain started around 9 that night. Not the kind of rain that makes people romantic. The kind that makes the city feel like it's trying to wash something dirty off its surface. Cold, heavy, relentless. The kind of rain that soaks through your coat before you reach the door and leaves you shivering in your bones long after you've stepped inside. Lena Parker heard it hammering against the windows of the Blue Anchor Diner and thought about the bus ride home. 40 minutes. No shelter at the stop on 5th. She'd be soaked through by the time she reached her apartment building, and she'd have to hang her only good uniform over the bathroom radiator and hope it dried before her next shift. She pushed the thought away and focused on table 7. More coffee. The trucker at table 7 nodded without looking up from his phone. Lena filled his cup, wiped the counter beside him with the damp cloth she kept tucked in her apron, and moved back toward the service station. It was a Tuesday. Late. The kind of Tuesday night that felt like it lasted 3 days. 3 other customers sat scattered through the diner. A couple sharing a piece of apple pie near the front window. An older woman nursing hot tea and reading a paperback with a cracked spine. Nobody important. Nobody who needed much. Lena liked nights like this. Quiet nights meant she could think. And thinking was the one luxury she hadn't completely surrendered. She was restacking clean mugs behind the counter when the door opened. She didn't look up immediately. She heard the sound of the bell above the door, heard the rush of cold air, heard the particular way the rain changed pitch when the outside world briefly entered the room. She heard heavy footsteps. More than one person. 4, maybe 5. She heard the low murmur of voices that stopped the moment the door closed. That made her look up. 5 men had entered the Blue Anchor Diner. The first 2 were large. Not tall, the way basketball players are tall, but wide, dense. The kind of large that communicates a single clear message without words. They moved to either side of the door and stood with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the room. Their coats were expensive. Their expressions were empty. They didn't sit down. The next 2 were slightly smaller versions of the first 2, and they moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, checking corners, checking sightlines, checking exits. One of them glanced into the kitchen. One of them looked directly at Lena and held eye contact for exactly 2 seconds before looking away. And then, the last man walked in. He was not the largest. He was not the loudest. He didn't announce himself in any obvious way. He simply moved through the door and into the room, and somehow, without any visible effort, the room rearranged itself around him. Lena had grown up in Chicago. She understood power the way most people understand weather. You didn't need someone to explain it to you. You felt it coming before it arrived. This man brought power into the room the way a thunderstorm brings pressure. Everything felt slightly heavier the moment he stepped inside. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, dark hair with gray at the temples, a face that might have been handsome once and had transformed into something better than handsome with age. Hard lines, steady eyes. The kind of face that had made decisions and lived with them. He wore a dark coat over a dark suit, and he moved through the diner toward the back corner booth without looking at the menu board, without looking at the decor, without looking at anything except exactly what he needed to see. He sat down with his back to the wall. Old habit, Lena thought automatically. Needs to see every entrance. She had no idea who he was. Not yet. She only knew that the Blue Anchor Diner had never had a customer like this, and the 2 men standing by the door were going to make the couple near the window very uncomfortable, and she needed to handle this professionally. She picked up her order pad. She crossed the diner and stopped at the edge of the corner booth. "Good evening. Can I get you started with something?" He looked up at her. His eyes were a particular shade of dark that made it difficult to read anything behind them. Not cold exactly, more like carefully controlled, like a door that had been locked from the inside. "Coffee," he said. His voice was low and even. "And we're expecting one more person." "Of course, I'll get that started." She returned to the counter and began preparing the coffee, and as she did, she replayed the last 30 seconds in her mind. The security detail, the corner booth, the back-to-wall positioning, the controlled stillness. She'd seen patterns like this before, not in a diner, in law school. During her second year at Northwestern, she'd done a clinical placement with a firm that handled white-collar criminal defense. One of their clients had moved through the world exactly like this man did. Constant security, controlled spaces, strategic positioning, the habit of treating every room like a potential threat. Lena set the thought aside and told herself it was none of her business. She delivered the coffee. He thanked her with a brief nod. She went back to work. The second man arrived 12 minutes later. He was different from the first in every visible way. Heavier, pinker in the face. He moved with the particular confidence of a man who had never once worried about where his next meal was coming from. His suit was expensive, but sat on him wrongly, like he'd bought the most expensive thing in the store, and trusted the price tag to do the rest. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm and was already smiling before he reached the booth, already extending his hand, already talking. "Adrian, thank you for meeting me. I know this isn't your usual kind of place." The first man Adrian stood, briefly shook the hand, sat back down. "Marcus." One word. Flat. Non-committal. He gestured at the seat across from him. Marcus Hale sat down, placed the leather portfolio on the table, and kept smiling. It was the smile of a man who believed the meeting was already going his way. "I had my team prepare everything. Final terms. You're going to be very pleased." Adrian said nothing. Lena approached to take the second man's order. "Just water," Marcus said without looking at her. "We won't be long." She brought the water. She refilled Adrian's coffee. She moved quietly and efficiently the way she always did, becoming part of the background the way good waitresses learn to do. She went back to the service counter. She began rolling silverware into paper napkins, a task that occupied her hands and required no conscious thought. The two men across the room were talking in low voices. She could hear the rhythm of the conversation, but not the words. Marcus talked more. Adrian talked less. The leather portfolio was open on the table. Papers were being turned. Lena rolled silverware. Around 11 o'clock, the couple near the front window paid their bill and left. The older woman with the paperback finished her tea and left shortly after. The trucker at table 7 had been staring at his phone so long he'd forgotten he had coffee, and when Lena offered to warm it up, he shook his head and laid a 10 on the table and put on his jacket, which left her alone in the diner, alone with Adrian and Marcus and 5 men who stood like statues near every exit. She was not afraid exactly. Fear required a specific trigger, and the men near the doors weren't threatening her. They were ignoring her. There is a difference, but she was aware. Aware the way her mother used to tell her to be aware when she walked home late. Not frightened. Alert. She began wiping down the empty tables. She worked her way through the diner methodically, table by table, the way she always did. She didn't rush. She didn't avoid the corner booth. She treated it the same as every other table in the room and worked steadily toward it. And when she reached the booth beside it, she heard Marcus Hale say something that made her slow down. Clause 7 transfers all project oversight responsibility to the managing partner. That's standard. Your team should have seen it immediately. Something flickered in the back of Lena's mind. Not an alarm exactly, more like recognition. She moved her cloth in slow, even circles across the table surface and kept her eyes down. Standard language for what category of contract? Adrian's voice was measured. Infrastructure development. The government classification requires the managing partner to hold liability certification. Your name carries that certification in the city registry. It's a formality." Lena's cloth stopped moving. She was no longer cleaning the table. She was standing completely still, with her head down, and her cloth resting against the surface, and her mind racing through something she hadn't thought about in 3 years. Infrastructure development contracts, government liability certification, managing partner clause, clause 7. She knew those words. She knew them the way you know a song you grew up with. You don't remember learning it. You just know it. During her 3rd year at Northwestern, before everything collapsed, she had written a 50-page thesis on hidden liability transfer mechanisms in government-adjacent construction contracts. Her professor had called it the most technically sophisticated student paper he'd seen in a decade. The thesis had been built around exactly this kind of language: the managing partner clause, the liability certification transfer, the way certain contract structures could be written to look like administrative formality while actually functioning as a total transfer of criminal exposure. If someone were prosecuted for fraud connected to a government infrastructure project, the managing partner would absorb the entire criminal liability, not the company, not the board, the named managing partner, the person who signed as the managing partner. Lena set her cloth down carefully on the table. She looked up. The papers were spread across the booth table. Marcus had angled them toward Adrian, pointing at specific clauses with his finger still explaining, still smiling. Adrian was leaning forward slightly, reading. His pen was in his hand. She could see the contract from where she stood. She could see the paragraph structure. She could see the header for Section 7. She could see the dense language that looked like standard government boilerplate and was absolutely not standard government boilerplate. She could see it was a trap, not a minor trap, not an oversight, a carefully constructed, expertly worded, completely devastating trap. If Adrian Volkov signed that contract, he would be accepting personal criminal liability for every fraudulent element of whatever project Marcus Hale had built. When the government came, and based on the complexity of this trap, the government was already coming, Adrian would be standing directly in the line of fire. His name, his signature, his prison sentence, and Marcus Hale would walk away clean. Lena stood between 2 tables and understood with complete clarity that the smartest thing she could do was go back to the service counter and roll more silverware and mind her own business. These were not her people. This was not her world. She did not know Adrian Volkov. She did not owe him anything. He was a powerful man sitting in a diner she cleaned, and whatever happened to him because of the paper he was about to sign was the consequence of choices he had made long before she was born. She told herself all of this. She believed all of it. And then she remembered her mother. Not her mother, the way she was now sitting in the small house in Evanston that Lena had helped her move into after the bills finally destroyed everything. But her mother, the way she was 6 years ago, lying in a hospital bed in Northwestern Memorial, running a fever of 103, holding a stack of medical billing documents in her trembling hands. There was a clause in her insurance contract, not a complicated clause, not a devious one, just a clause that most people wouldn't notice because it was written in dense legal language buried in the middle of a 14-page document. A clause that reclassified her mother's treatment as elective rather than emergency, which shifted financial responsibility from the insurance company to the patient, which meant Lena's mother owed $370,000, which meant Lena's law school career ended, which meant this diner, which meant tonight. She stood between 2 tables and felt something settle inside her chest. Not anger exactly, not righteousness exactly. Something quieter and more stubborn than either of those things. Something that had survived 3 years of lost dreams and 12-hour shifts and feeling invisible in a world that had decided she didn't matter. She walked toward the corner booth. One of the large men near the wall shifted slightly. She kept walking. She stopped at the edge of the booth. "Sir?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Adrian looked up. Marcus looked up. The room felt like it tilted very slightly on its axis. "Sir, this contract is a trap." The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted less than 5 seconds and felt like 5 minutes. Marcus Hale's smile didn't disappear immediately. It went through several stages. Confusion first, then recognition, then something cold and calculating. Adrian Volkov's expression didn't change at all, which was somehow worse. He looked at her with those locked-door eyes and said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to make lesser people step back. "You're the waitress," he said. Not unkindly, simply observing. "Yes." "You read contracts." "I used to." "And you're telling me this one is a trap?" "Yes." Marcus recovered. He leaned back in the booth with deliberate casualness and put his smile back on, but it was a different smile now. "She's a waitress." She overheard half a conversation. "Adrian, this is completely standard language for 'shut up, Marcus.'" The words were quiet. Utterly quiet. Marcus shut up. Adrian kept his eyes on Lena. "Show me." She reached forward and turned the contract pages. She found Section 7 with the ease of someone who had studied that exact language for a year of her life. She laid her finger on the relevant paragraph. "This clause," she said, "managing partner liability certification. The language makes it look administrative. It's not. It's a transfer mechanism. Whoever signs as managing partner accepts direct criminal liability for the entire project, not shared liability, not company liability, personal liability. If this project has fraud connected to it, and based on how carefully this clause is written, there's fraud connected to it, the government will come directly for the person whose name is on this signature line." She looked at Adrian. "That would be you." Silence. Complete, heavy, absolute silence. Adrian picked up the contract. He read the paragraph she had indicated. He turned back 2 pages and read something else. He turned forward 3 pages. His expression remained unchanged, but she watched his jaw tighten by a fraction and his eyes sharpen by a degree, and she knew the way she had always known, even before she knew it, that she was right. He set the contract down. He looked at Marcus Hale. And Marcus Hale, who had been smiling since he walked in the door, who had moved through the world for 50 years, on the assumption that money was armor and confidence was a weapon, finally ran out of things to say. "Adrian, leave." "Let me explain." "Marcus." The name came out like something dropped from a great height. "Leave, now. Take your contract." Marcus gathered his papers with shaking hands. He pushed himself out of the booth. He straightened his expensive jacket. He looked at Lena with an expression that contained several things she would only fully understand later. Fury calculation and a specific kind of fear that people feel when a plan they spent a long time building collapses without warning. He walked out of the diner. The door closed behind him. The rain was still coming down. Lena stood at the edge of the corner booth with her cloth in her hand and realized her heart was hammering at approximately twice its normal rate. Adrian was still sitting in the booth, still looking at her, still with those locked-door eyes that revealed nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena Parker." "Lena Parker." He repeated it like he was filing it somewhere. "How do you know contract law?" "I studied it, law school, Northwestern." Something moved behind his eyes. "Northwestern, past tense?" "Past tense." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "That's not really a question you need the answer to." He considered that. He didn't argue with it. "No," he agreed. "I suppose it isn't." He reached into his coat and produced a business card and set it on the table between them. It was a simple card. A name, a phone number, nothing else. "I'd like to speak with you again," he said, professionally. She looked at the card. She looked at him. "I'm a waitress in a roadside diner at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night." "Not anymore," he said simply. He stood. He put on his coat. He nodded to her once precisely like a period at the end of a sentence. Then Adrian Volkov walked out of the Blue Anchor Diner, and Lena Parker stood in the empty restaurant with a business card in her hand and the sound of rain against the windows and the absolute certainty that she had just made a decision she couldn't unmake, even though she hadn't consciously decided anything at all. She set the card in her apron pocket. She went back to rolling silverware. But her hands were not steady. She didn't call the number that night. She didn't call it the next morning either, though she thought about it approximately 30 times between waking up and making coffee. What she did instead was go back to the diner for her Wednesday afternoon shift work, 6 hours without incident, and then sit in the break room during her 15-minute break and pull the card out of her wallet and look at it. Adrian Volkov. She'd looked him up the night before. Of course she had. You don't meet a man like that and not look him up. What she found was what she'd half expected. What she hadn't expected was the scale of it. He wasn't just a businessman, the way the polite news articles described him. He was the businessman. In Chicago, in the entire Midwest, in a dozen industries that touched millions of ordinary lives. Construction, shipping, real estate, commercial property management, port logistics. 3 regional banks that bore different names but traced their ownership back through several corporate layers to the same place. There were also stories that lived in a different corner of the internet. Older stories. More careful stories written by journalists who chose their words with a particular kind of precision that suggested they were afraid of something. Stories about the Volkov family and what they had been before they were businessmen. What some people still whispered they were. Lena was not naive. She had grown up in Chicago. She understood that some fortunes had particular roots. She also understood something that naive people don't always understand, that the world is not divided into clean halves. Not good and evil, not legal and illegal. The world is divided into people who have power and people who don't, and the line between them is drawn by money and law in equal measure, and the law itself is often a weapon owned by the powerful. She had learned that in school. She had learned it again when her mother's insurance company found the clause. She was still thinking about it when her break ended, and she went back to the floor. Thursday came and went. Friday, she was pulling a double shift, which meant she was still in the diner at midnight, and the break room floor drain was backed up again, and the cook had called in sick, which meant the line cook was handling everything alone, and the service was slow, and table 4 was unhappy about their eggs, which were not her fault, but were absolutely her problem. She handled it. She handled it the way she handled everything. Calmly, methodically, by breaking the problem into its component parts and addressing each one in sequence. This was not a skill she had learned in law school. This was a skill she had learned from her mother, who had raised 2 children alone after Lena's father left, and who had never once, not once, let the size of a problem convince her that it couldn't be handled. You handle it, her mother used to say. You don't know how yet. That's fine. You figure out how, and then you handle it. Lena handled the table 4 situation. She handled the drain situation. She handled the exhausted line cook situation. She handled the midnight rush from the bar crowd that descended at 12:30 and ate enormous amounts of food and were, to be fair, quite generous tippers. She got home at 2 in the morning. She sat on the edge of her bed and took the card out of her wallet and looked at it for a long time. Then she set it on her nightstand and went to sleep. She called on Saturday morning. The phone rang once. "Lena Parker," said the voice on the other end. He picked up on the first ring. He knew her number. Of course he did. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to meet." "I know you would. That's why I'm calling. I have questions first." A brief pause. "Ask them." The Marcus Hale contract. What was the project? A government infrastructure development package. Port expansion. $300 million. And the fraud element. Another pause. Longer this time. She understood that she was asking a man who lived by controlled information to provide information he had controlled for years. She waited. The project was designed to redirect a significant portion of government funds through a series of subcontractors. The subcontractors were shells. The money would have disappeared into private accounts. Whose accounts? Not mine. Hale's. And others. And they were going to put your signature on the managing partner line and let you absorb all of it if anyone investigated. Yes. Lena sat with that for a moment. Have you contacted the government? Not yet. Are you planning to? The pause this time was the longest. That depends on several things, including what you and I decide in this conversation. She understood what he meant. He was holding information that could damage powerful people. The decision about what to do with that information was complicated by the fact that some of those powerful people were in government, and the government was also the entity that could potentially investigate him for things completely unrelated to Marcus Hale. This was exactly the kind of strategic legal complexity she had been trained to analyze. "I have more questions," she said. "I expected you would. I want to meet somewhere public. Name the place." "The coffee shop on Michigan and Erie, Monday morning, 10 o'clock. "I'll be there." She hesitated for exactly 1 second, then she said what she needed to say. "Mr. Volkov, I'm not the person I was in law school. I haven't practiced in 3 years. I'm not licensed. I'm a waitress." "You were a waitress," he said. "On Tuesday night, you were the only person in that room who saw what nobody else saw, including 4 lawyers I pay very well." She said nothing. "Monday," he said. 10 o'clock. He hung up. Lena set her phone on the kitchen counter and stood in her small apartment kitchen and looked out the window at the street below where the Saturday morning world was going about its ordinary business in the thin November sunlight. She thought about what she was considering. She thought about all the reasons it was reckless and probably wrong. She thought about her brother Jamie, who was 19, and taking community college classes and working part-time at a hardware store and trying to build something for himself. She thought about the rent she paid every month, and the money she sent her mother, and the way her feet ached after a 12-hour shift, and the way she sometimes late at night still reached for law books that were no longer on the shelf. She thought about Clause 7. She thought about the way Adrian Volkov had said you were a waitress, past tense, like he had already decided. The coffee shop on Michigan and Erie was busy on Monday morning, in the way that Michigan Avenue is always busy. Professionals carrying cups toward office buildings, students with laptops, a woman walking 3 small dogs with the focused energy of someone managing a crisis. Lena arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table near the window. Corner table. She'd done it automatically and realized why halfway through sitting down, and the self-awareness made her slightly angry at herself. He arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. No security detail this time, or rather, no visible security detail. She'd noticed the man at the counter who had arrived 30 seconds before Adrian and ordered a black coffee and chosen a stool with a sightline to the door. And she'd noticed the woman reading a newspaper at the table near the entrance who hadn't turned a page since Lena arrived. She said nothing about this. Adrian sat down across from her. He ordered coffee from the passing server. He waited until they were alone to speak. "You have more questions," he said. "I want to understand your businesses. The legitimate ones. Not the stories. The actual structures." He looked at her with something that might have been faint surprise. "Most people in your position would want protection first. Money first." "I'm not interested in protection or money," she said. "I'm interested in whether what you're asking me to do is legal. What I'm asking you to do is analyze contracts." "Contract analysis is not a crime," she agreed. "Working for someone whose business interests include illegal activity is, depending on the specifics, potentially a crime." "Then I'll need to convince you my business interests don't include illegal activity." "Yes, you will." He spent the next 40 minutes doing exactly that. He was, she discovered, extraordinarily well prepared for this conversation. He had not come to meet her with charm or with pressure, or with the heavy weight of his presence as a negotiating tool. He had come with information, specific, detailed, verifiable. He walked her through the structure of Volkov Development Group. 3 primary subsidiaries and 11 ancillary companies, all registered, all properly capitalized, all with clean audit histories going back 12 years. He walked her through his construction contracts, his shipping agreements, his real estate holdings. He gave her names of lawyers she could call audit firms. She could verify government officials who had worked with his companies on legitimate projects. He was thorough. He was also, she noticed, completely honest about the history. 10 years ago, he said at one point, I was involved in things I am no longer involved in. This is not something I'm going to pretend didn't happen. If you choose to work with me, you will need to know that there are people in this city who remember what I was and who would like very much to use what I am now to punish me for what I was then. She held his gaze. And you're telling me this because you're too intelligent to miss it, and I'd rather have you find out from me than from someone who wants to use it as leverage. She thought about that for a moment. What exactly would you need me to do? Every contract that passes through my organization goes through a legal team. I have 4 corporate lawyers. 3 of them are competent. 1 of them is excellent. None of them caught what you caught in 45 seconds with a coffee pot in your hand. She felt something flicker in her chest. That's flattering. It doesn't tell me what you need. I need a second set of eyes. An independent analyst. Someone who reviews contracts with no internal loyalty to the people who drafted them. Someone who can tell me when something is wrong without worrying about office politics or billing relationships. You have 4 lawyers and you need a waitress to check their work. I need someone with your specific ability to see what other people don't see, he said. What you do for a living right now is not relevant to that. Lena looked out the window at Michigan Avenue. A woman in a bright orange coat was walking fast against the wind, holding her hat down with one hand. The 3 small dogs were now tangled around a parking meter while their owner negotiated with her phone. I have a condition, Lena said. I expected you would. No violence, no cover-ups, no using legal analysis as a tool to create illegal structures. I analyze what's in front of me. I tell you what I find. What you do with that information has to stay within the law. Agreed. And if I find something that suggests illegal activity within your organization, you tell me, and we address it appropriately. Appropriately includes going to the government if necessary. He was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to accept the possibility that employing you could result in someone else inside my organization facing legal consequences. Yes. Including potentially me. Yes. He looked at her with those locked-door eyes for a long moment. Then he said, Agreed. She hadn't expected it to be that simple. The simplicity of it made her more thoughtful, not less. Why? She asked. Because I am tired, he said, and the words came out with a flatness that suggested they were exactly true. Of not knowing what is happening inside my own organization. I have been building this for 20 years, and I am surrounded by people who have reasons to tell me what I want to hear rather than what is real. He paused. You walked up to my table on a Tuesday night in a roadside diner and told me something I needed to hear, even though every rational instinct you had told you not to. That is not a small thing. Lena was quiet for a moment. The pay? She asked. He named a number. She controlled her expression very carefully. It was 4 times what she made at the diner in a month. Start date, she said. Whenever you're ready. She thought about her manager at the Blue Anchor. She thought about the 2 weeks' notice she would need to give. She thought about the break room with the backed-up floor drain and the empty table 7 and the late Tuesday shifts and the way the bus stop on 5th had no shelter in the rain. 2 weeks, she said. I need to give proper notice. He nodded. He stood. He put on his coat. He extended his hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief and completely businesslike. Ms. Parker, he said. Mr. Volkov. He walked out of the coffee shop. Lena sat at the corner table near the window on Michigan Avenue and finished her coffee slowly. The woman in the orange coat had made it past and disappeared. The 3 small dogs were finally untangled. She had just shaken hands with the most powerful and potentially the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she felt for the first time in 3 years something she had nearly forgotten the feeling of. The specific quiet electricity of a mind that has found the problem it was built to solve. She finished her coffee. She put on her coat. She walked back out into Chicago. And the city, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was hers again. She gave 2 weeks' notice on a Monday morning. Her manager, a tired man named Don, who had been running the Blue Anchor for 11 years and had seen waitresses come and go with the same resigned regularity that he'd seen the menu change, took the news with a slow nod and asked if she needed a reference. "No," she said, "but thank you." "You sure? Because you're good, Lena. Better than this place deserves." She looked at him and felt something unexpected move through her chest. Don had never said anything like that before. In 3 years of working his floors, he had given her exactly 2 compliments, both of them about her coffee technique. "I appreciate that," she said. "Whatever you're going to," he said, "I hope it's what you should be doing." She thought about that sentence for most of her remaining 2 weeks. What you should be doing. As if the universe had an opinion about the proper use of a person's specific capabilities, and as if that opinion occasionally found ways to make itself known through rainy Tuesday nights and corner booths and contracts that most people in the room couldn't read. She finished her last shift on a Friday evening. The floor drain in the break room had been repaired by that point. She mopped it one final time, changed out of her uniform, folded it neatly and left it on the break room table, and walked out the back door into the November cold. She didn't look back, not because she was ungrateful, but because she had spent 3 years looking backward and she was finished with it. On Monday, she walked into the Volkov Development Group headquarters on the 22nd floor of a building on Walker Drive, and the city of Chicago spread itself below her office window like a map of everything she had almost stopped believing she deserved. The office was modest by the standards of the floor. It had a desk, 2 chairs, a set of bookshelves that were currently empty, and a window that faced east. Someone had placed a single lamp on the desk and a notepad and a pen beside it, which she found unexpectedly thoughtful. A woman named Carol, who was the administrative coordinator for the executive floor, and moved through the building with the quiet authority of someone who actually ran everything. Showed her where the coffee was, where the printer was, where the supply room was, and where to find the digital contract library. "Mr. Volkov's lawyers use the shared drive," Carol said. "You'll have full access. There's also a standing arrangement for you to receive physical copies of any contract before it's signed. Mr. Volkov's instruction was that nothing goes to final signature without your review." Lena looked at her. His lawyers know about this arrangement. They were informed last week. How did they take it? Carol's expression remained perfectly professional. "They took it in the way that lawyers take things," she said. "Which is to say they asked several questions about your credentials and then stopped asking questions when Mr. Volkov stopped answering them." Lena filed that information carefully. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop and spent the first morning reading. Not contracts yet. Background. She read every piece of public documentation she could find on Volkov Development's current projects. She read the corporate structure filings. She read the audit summaries Carol sent over. She read the property management agreements and the shipping logistics contracts and the construction oversight documents. She did not read fast. She read the way she had always read legal documents, which was slowly and with complete attention, the way you walk through a dark room you don't know yet. Slowly, feeling for obstacles, building a mental map one careful step at a time. By noon, she had the beginning of a picture. The business was by all visible evidence exactly what Adrian had described. Legitimate, large, competently run, profitable. But there were patterns that bothered her. Not red flags exactly, not anything she could point to and name, more like a particular way that certain contracts were structured that reminded her of something she'd once studied. A certain repetition of specific legal language across multiple independent agreements. A consistency that felt slightly too consistent, like a signature appearing on too many documents that should have come from different sources. She set the feeling aside. She needed more data before she could name it. She ordered lunch from a nearby place Carol recommended and ate at her desk and kept reading. At 2 o'clock, her office door opened without a knock. The man who entered was approximately 50 slight, with a narrow face and the kind of eyes that calculated everything and revealed nothing. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a folder, and he moved into the room with the comfortable ease of someone accustomed to owning whatever space he was in. He stopped in the middle of her office and looked at her desk and then at her. "You're the waitress," he said. The words were not hostile. They were simply descriptive, delivered with the complete absence of warmth that made them more insulting than open contempt would have been. Lena set down her pen. "I'm the contract analyst," she said. "And you are Victor Kane. I handle strategic operations for Mr. Volkov." She had read his name in the organizational documents that morning. He had been with Adrian for 20 years. He was on paper the second most powerful person in the company. "Mr. Kane," she said. "I wanted to introduce myself," he said, "and to make something clear while we're being direct with each other. Please." Adrian has a tendency to collect people he finds interesting. He gets attached to them. He starts to believe they have abilities that in the cold light of reality are rather more limited than they appeared in the initial moment of discovery. He paused. "I've seen it before. It always ends the same way." Lena looked at him steadily. "Is there a contract you wanted me to review, Mr. Kane?" Something moved across his face. It was very brief. If she'd been looking away, she would have missed it. It was the expression of a man who expected a different kind of response and is recalibrating. "No," he said. "No contract." "Then I appreciate the introduction. I'll get back to my reading." He stood in the middle of the office for exactly 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked out and pulled the door shut behind him with the precise, controlled quietness of someone who wants you to know they're choosing not to slam it. Lena sat very still for a moment after he left. Then she picked up her pen and wrote Victor Kane's name at the top of her notepad and circled it twice. She wasn't sure yet what she was circling it for, but she had been in law long enough to know that the first person who comes to tell you that you don't belong somewhere is very often the person with the most to lose from your being there. She went back to reading. Jig. The first real test came 3 days into the job. A contract landed on her desk Thursday morning with a post-it note from Carol that said, "Mr. Volkov requests review by end of day." It was a construction oversight agreement for a new commercial development on the north side. 60 pages. Standard boilerplate on the surface. She read it in 2 hours. She found the problem in hour 1. Not a trap this time. Not the sophisticated kind of legal weapon she'd spotted in Section 7 of Marcus Hale's contract. This was simpler, and in some ways more alarming because of that simplicity. A subcontractor payment structure that, if followed as written, would technically make Volkov Development responsible for labor violations committed by 3 independent companies they were contracting through. Not criminal liability. Civil liability. The kind that resulted in lawsuits worth tens of millions of dollars and generated the kind of bad press that certain people in the government would find extremely useful. She wrote a 2-page analysis. Clear language, specific line citations. 3 recommended modifications to the payment structure that would isolate Volkov Development from the subcontractor liability without affecting the project timeline. She walked it down to the executive suite. Carol directed her to a conference room where Adrian was finishing a meeting with 2 men she didn't recognize. She waited outside. The meeting ended. The 2 men left. She went in. Adrian was at the head of the table reading something. He looked up when she entered. "The North Side contract," she said. She set her analysis on the table in front of him. "There's a liability problem in the subcontractor payment structure. Page 41 through 45. It's not criminal exposure, but it's significant civil risk. I've suggested 3 modifications." He picked up her analysis. He read it. He didn't read fast, and he didn't pretend to read fast. He read it the way she recognized, with the same particular quality of attention she brought to documents herself. He set it down. "You found this in 2 hours." "Yes. My legal team had this contract for 4 days." She said nothing. He looked at her for a moment. "Which of the 3 modifications do you recommend?" "The second one," she said immediately. "The first one protects you completely, but creates language that will make future subcontractor negotiations more difficult. The third one is a compromise that doesn't fully solve the problem. The second one creates a clear structural boundary that protects you now and doesn't create new complications." He nodded once. "Done. Tell Carol to pass the modification instructions to the legal team." She started to leave. "Lena," she stopped. What you did here, the way you saw it, the speed of it, this is what I hired you for. A pause. I want you to understand that. She turned back. I know what you hired me for. Do you? He looked at her directly. Because I think you're still waiting for this to be something other than what it is. She held his gaze. And what is it? A person with your ability doing the work she was built to do. She thought about Dawn saying better than this place deserves. I'll let Carol know about the modifications, she said. She left the conference room. She walked back down the hallway toward her office and felt something shifting inside her chest the way ice shifts in early spring, not breaking, just beginning to give. The second week was harder. Not because the work was difficult. The work was the easiest thing about the second week. Contracts arrived at a steady pace, and she read them with the same methodical attention she'd brought to the first one. And she found problems in 4 out of 9 agreements, ranging from minor to significant. She produced analyses. The legal team implemented modifications. Nobody thanked her, which was fine. She wasn't there for thanks. What made the second week harder was Victor Kane. He didn't come to her office again. He was too intelligent for that. But she felt his presence the way you feel cold air coming under a door. Subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore entirely. She heard it in the way certain members of the legal team responded to her modification requests. The particular slowness with which they implemented changes. The emails that came back with questions that were slightly too detailed, slightly too technical, designed to challenge her conclusions while maintaining the surface politeness of professional inquiry. She answered every question, thoroughly, precisely, without a trace of defensiveness. She also noticed which member of the legal team sent the most questions. A man named David Rice, young Harvard-trained with the faintly hostile confidence of someone who believed his credentials were the most important thing about him. He sat 2 offices down from Victor Kane. He had lunch with Victor Kane 3 times in the second week. She noted this. She wasn't paranoid. She simply paid attention, which is a different thing. Paranoia is fear without evidence. Attention is just good practice. The moment that changed the second week happened on Thursday afternoon. She was reviewing a shipping logistics contract when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered it. Is this Lena Parker? A man's voice, professional, cautious. Yes. My name is Robert Hale. I'm Marcus Hale's brother. She went completely still. I'd like to meet with you, he said. I think you have information that could be very useful to both of us. She kept her voice level. I'm not sure what information you think I have, Mr. Hale. My brother has been having a difficult time since the Blue Anchor meeting. Certain business relationships have ended. Certain people have stopped returning his calls. I understand you were present at that meeting. I was working, she said. Yes, I know. A pause. I'm not calling to threaten you. I want to be clear about that. I'm calling because there's a conversation I believe would benefit from happening before things get complicated. What kind of complicated? The kind that involves documentation being submitted to federal investigators. Another pause. My brother made mistakes. I'm not going to defend them. But some of the documentation he has could implicate other people. People connected to Volkov. Lena's mind processed this at high speed. If your brother has evidence of illegal activity, the appropriate thing to do is contact a lawyer and potentially the FBI. He has a lawyer. What he doesn't have is certainty about what happens when certain documents become public. He's concerned about the response from specific parties. He meant Adrian. He was calling to find out if Lena was a channel to Adrian that could be used for negotiation. Mr. Hale, she said, I analyze contracts. I'm not a negotiator, and I'm not a spokesperson for anyone. If your brother has concerns about his legal exposure, he should speak with his attorney about his options. A long pause. I see, Robert Hale said. Yes, she said. I think you do. She hung up. She sat at her desk for approximately 90 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Carol and asked if Mr. Volkov had 15 minutes that afternoon. He had 10. She walked into his office at 4:30 and told him about the call. Every detail, the exact words, her response, what she believed the purpose of the call was. Adrian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You called me immediately," he said. "You needed to know." Most people would have waited, thought about how to position it. "I'm not most people," she said simply. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically. A small adjustment like the first visible change in a structure that is slowly from the inside beginning to open. "Hale has documentation," he said. "Apparently. The question is, what's in it? The question is whether his attorney advises him to submit it voluntarily or wait to be subpoenaed." She looked at him directly. "And the question is whether there's anything in your organization that would be a problem if the government started looking." He met her eyes. "My lawyers say no." "What do you say?" Silence. She held his gaze and waited. This was the moment. She understood it the way she understood a key moment in a contract. The language that came next would tell her everything about what she was actually dealing with. "There are things," he said slowly, "that were set in motion years ago. Before I restructured the businesses, I believe they were properly closed out, but I have not verified that independently." "Then we need to verify it," she said, "before anyone from the government asks." He looked at her for a long moment. "You understand that if you verify it and find something—" "I understand. And you're still suggesting this course of action?" "Yes." A pause. "Why?" "Because you told me in a coffee shop that you were tired of not knowing what was happening inside your own organization." She kept her voice even. "This is what knowing feels like. It's not always comfortable." He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to feel significant. "Start Monday," he said. "I'll have Victor open the archive records." She nodded. She stood to leave. "Lena." She stopped. "Victor will push back on this." "I expect he will. He'll tell you the records are privileged or proprietary or require additional authorization. Then you should make clear in advance that he's to give me full access." "I will." A pause. "But I want you to understand. Victor has been with me for 20 years. Whatever he tells you about those records, whatever resistance he offers, it will be sophisticated. He's not a simple man." She looked at Adrian. "Neither am I." She left his office. She walked down the hallway to the elevator and stood waiting for it. And she felt the building around her differently than she had on her first day. Not like a place she was visiting. Like a place she was beginning to understand. Like a room she'd been feeling her way through in the dark and had just found the first light switch. The elevator came. She got in. She pressed the button for the lobby and thought about Monday and Victor Kane and 20 years of archive records and the particular way that the most dangerous things are always the ones that someone very intelligent has spent a long time making sure nobody looks at. The doors opened. She walked out into Chicago. Monday arrived with the specific energy of a reckoning. Lena reached her office at 7:30. Carol wasn't in yet. The floor was quiet. She made her own coffee in the break room down the hall and sat at her desk and organized her notes from the previous week into a clean document before anyone else arrived. At 8:15, she walked down the hall to Victor Kane's office and knocked. "Come in." He was already there. He was always already there, she would learn. The first in the last out. 20 years of that discipline applied with the consistency of a man who believed that presence was power. He looked up from his desk. He had clearly been expecting her. "The archive access," she said. Adrian mentioned it. Victor's voice was smooth. "I've given it some thought. The historical records contain highly sensitive material, privileged communications, proprietary business strategy. I've spoken with David Rice about the legal implications of broad, unsupervised access." "I'm sure David had interesting things to say," Lena said. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. "The recommendation is that any review of historical records be conducted jointly, you and a member of the legal team present. Which member of the legal team did you have in mind? David Rice. She had expected exactly this. David Rice, who lunched with Victor Kane 3 times a week, and whose questions to her had been specifically designed to challenge her conclusions. David Rice, reviewing sensitive archive records alongside her, would be functionally equivalent to Victor Kane reading over her shoulder. No, she said. Victor raised his eyebrows slightly. No, Mr. Volkov instructed you to give me full access. That means unsupervised access. If you've reinterpreted that instruction, I'll go clarify it with him directly. She held his gaze for exactly 5 seconds. She had counted because she wanted to give him enough time to decide whether to push further without giving him enough time to construct something elaborate. He made his decision in 3 of those 5 seconds. I'll have the digital archive credentials sent to your email by 9 o'clock, he said. Thank you. She left. She was back at her desk with her coffee and her notes when the credentials arrived at 8:52. 8 minutes early. A small signal. You won this one. Don't assume the next one will go the same way. She began working through the archive. It was enormous. 20 years of records. Contracts, meeting minutes, financial summaries, correspondence, legal opinions. The scale of it would have been overwhelming to someone who approached it as a library. She didn't approach it as a library. She approached it as a pattern recognition problem, which was different. She wasn't looking for a specific thing. She was looking for the shape of a specific thing. The way certain language recurred. The way certain company names appeared in multiple documents across different years. The way certain financial structures were built and then quietly dismantled. She worked through the first 2 days of archive review with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. She took notes. She built a timeline. She cross-referenced. By Wednesday afternoon, she had found the shape she was looking for, and it was not what she had expected. She had expected to find remnants of older activity, things Adrian had done before the restructuring, things that had perhaps not been fully cleaned up. That was the possibility she was stress testing. What she found instead was something being done now. Not by Adrian, by someone inside his organization. The pattern was sophisticated. She had to give it that. It was built across multiple shell structures and hidden behind layers of legitimate transactions. If you were looking at any single piece of it, you would see nothing alarming. You had to be able to hold 20 pieces in your mind simultaneously and rotate them against each other like a 3-dimensional puzzle to see what they formed together. What they formed together was a systematic extraction operation. Money was leaving the Volkov Development Group, not in large, dramatic movements that would trigger financial alerts. In small, consistent flows disguised as ordinary operating costs. Legal fees, consulting retainers, equipment maintenance agreements, all paid to companies that, when she traced them through the corporate registry, resolved back to the same cluster of accounts. She didn't have the forensic accounting tools to follow the money all the way to its destination, but she knew enough to know she was looking at something that had been running for years and had been specifically designed to survive a non-specialist audit. This was not a contract problem. This was a betrayal. She sat back in her chair and stared at her notes and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Something more specific than fear. The feeling of standing at the edge of a thing that is much larger than it appeared from a distance. She thought about what she'd told Adrian in the coffee shop on Michigan and Erie. If I find something that suggests illegal activity within your organization, you tell me, and we address it appropriately. He had said agreed. She thought about what that agreement meant, now that she was holding evidence pointing not to some historical remnant of Adrian's past, but to an active, ongoing financial crime being committed inside his present operation. She thought about who could run something this sophisticated without detection for this long. Someone with long-term access. Someone who understood the internal financial structures well enough to hide movement within them. Someone who had been with the organization for 20 years. She looked at the name at the top of her notepad. Victor Kane. Still circled. Twice. She thought about his visit to her office on her first day. The casual delivery of the word waitress. the professional smoothness with which he'd blocked her archive access, and then, when that failed, conceded efficiently. She thought about David Rice and the carefully constructed technical questions and the lunches. She thought about the call from Robert Hale and the word complicated. She thought about the way certain things, when you held them against each other, stopped looking like coincidences. She picked up her phone. She called Carol. "Is Mr. Volkov available tomorrow morning early, before 7:30 if possible?" "He comes in at 6:45, Carol said. "Tell him I need 30 minutes. It's important." A pause. "I'll let him know." She hung up. She organized her notes into a clean, logical document. She went back through everything she'd found and stress-tested her own conclusions. She was a rigorous person by nature and by training, and she had learned that the most dangerous thing an analyst can do is fall in love with her own hypothesis. She pushed against her conclusions as hard as she knew how. They held. She printed everything, 3 copies. She locked 2 copies in her desk drawer. She took the 3rd home with her that evening in her bag. She didn't sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid, but because she was running calculations, the kind that don't have clean answers. She was trying to understand what a man who had operated a sophisticated extraction scheme inside Adrian Volkov's organization for years would do when someone discovered it. She was trying to understand what came next. She was also trying to understand something that existed in a different category from the financial analysis. She had spent 3 weeks inside this organization. She had watched Adrian in meetings and in brief hallway conversations and across conference tables. She had watched the way other people responded to him, the particular combination of wariness and respect that settled over a room when he entered it. She had also watched him in smaller moments, the way he listened to her analyses without interrupting, the way he asked the right follow-up question every time, which told her he was actually reading her work and not just receiving it. The way he had said, "You were the first person who treated me like a human being instead of a monster," and the particular quietness of it that made her understand it was not a practiced line. She was not naive enough to confuse these observations with anything other than what they were. She was an employee. He was her employer. The structure of that relationship was clear, and she had no interest in complicating it. But she was honest enough sitting in her apartment at 11 o'clock the night before. She was going to tell him his most trusted person was stealing from him to acknowledge that she cared what this did to him. Not as a calculation. As a human response to another human being in a situation that was about to become very painful. She set that thought aside. She made tea. She went over her notes one more time. She went to bed at midnight. She was in Adrian's office at 6:50 the next morning. He was already behind his desk, coffee in hand. He looked up when she knocked and waved her in. She sat down across from him. She set the printed document on the desk. "I found something in the archive," she said. "It's not historical, it's current, and it's significant." He looked at her face before he looked at the document. Whatever he read there made him set down his coffee. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She laid it out in the same clear, linear way she laid out every analysis. No drama, no embellishment. Evidence first, conclusion after. She took him through the pattern step by step. The financial structures, the shell companies, the timeline, the amounts. She told him everything. And when she finished, she looked at him directly and said the name she had been circling since her first day. Victor Kane. The silence that followed was not like the silence in the Blue Anchor diner after she said this contract is a trap. That silence had been surprised. Electric. The silence of something unexpected happening. This silence was different. This was the silence of a man absorbing something that hurt. Adrian sat very still. His hands were flat on the desk. His face showed nothing in the way that faces that are working very hard show nothing. She waited. She did not fill the silence. It was not her silence to fill. "How long?" he said finally. "Based on the pattern I can trace at minimum 4 years. Possibly longer. The earliest clear evidence I found is 4 years back." "How much?" "I can't give you a precise number without forensic accounting tools. But based on the volume and frequency of the extraction flows, I'm estimating $8 to $12 million. Another silence. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain of the pattern. I'm certain of the structure. I'm certain that what I'm looking at is designed to conceal exactly this kind of extraction, and that it's been designed by someone who knows this organization's financial structures from the inside." She paused. "If I'm wrong, the only cost is an investigation that clears him. If I'm right and we don't act—" "If you're right and we don't act," Adrian said quietly, "the man who has been beside me for 20 years will have taken more than money." She understood what he meant. He didn't just mean the $12 million. He meant the 20 years. He meant the trust. He meant the particular kind of damage that only comes from a long, deep betrayal. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the printed document from his desk. He turned to the first page and began reading. She had expected this. She sat quietly while he read. It took him 18 minutes to go through everything. He read with the same complete attention she had noticed from the first day. He didn't skim. He didn't jump to the conclusion and work backward. He read from beginning to end. When he finished, he set the document down. "What do you recommend?" he said. "3 things. First, bring in an independent forensic accountant. Someone with no existing relationship to the organization. They can follow the money to its destination and establish the precise figures." She paused. "Second, do not confront Victor until the forensic accounting is complete. He is sophisticated enough that if he knows he's been found, he will act to protect himself. The documentation may disappear. The shell structures may collapse." Another pause. "Third, and this is your decision, not mine. Consider whether this information needs to go to federal investigators." He looked at her. "You're recommending I potentially invite federal investigators into my organization. I'm recommending you consider whether the alternative is worse." She held his gaze. "If Victor has been running this extraction for 4 years, he has records, documentation, protection. If he feels cornered, he may attempt to use what he knows about this organization as leverage. You lose control of the narrative the moment he decides he needs to use it." Adrian said nothing. "Going to investigators proactively," she continued, "with your own evidence, your own analysis, your own cooperation, that's a different position than being investigated." The silence stretched. Outside the window, Chicago was waking up. 22 floors below, traffic moved and people walked, and the world did its ordinary business with no awareness of the conversation happening in this office. "Give me 24 hours, Adrian said. "Of course." She stood to leave. "Lena." She stopped, turned. He was looking at her with something she had not seen in his face before. Not the controlled stillness, not the locked door eyes. Something that had gotten past all of that. Something that looked a great deal like the specific vulnerability of a man who has just been handed a bill for 20 years of trust. "You could have buried this," he said. "You were reviewing historical records for compliance exposure. You could have found this and decided it was outside your mandate." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "I couldn't have." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. She left his office. She walked down the hallway to her own office and sat down at her desk and looked at the city through her east-facing window, and she understood, with the complete clarity that occasionally descends on a person in the exact moment they arrive somewhere they were supposed to be, that what happened in the next 24 hours was going to determine the shape of everything that came after it. She opened her laptop. She had more work to do. The 24 hours Adrian asked for stretched into 36. Lena knew because she counted them. Not obsessively, practically, the way you count anything that matters. She went home Thursday evening, made dinner, called her brother Jamie to check in on his classes, and then sat at her kitchen table with a second cup of tea and ran every piece of her analysis through her mind one more time, looking for the crack she might have missed. She didn't find one. That didn't make her feel better. It made her feel the particular weight of being right about something you wished you were wrong about. She was at her desk by 7 Friday morning. Carol arrived at 7:40 and brought her a coffee without being asked, which was either a coincidence or a signal that word had traveled, and Lena had learned enough about Carol in 3 weeks to understand it was not a coincidence. At 9:15, Adrian called her into his office. He was not alone. A woman sat in the chair to the right of his desk, mid-50s, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. She wore a gray jacket and carried a slim leather briefcase that she held on her lap with the careful ease of someone accustomed to the contents being important. "Lena Parker," Adrian said. "This is Margaret Cho. She's a forensic accountant. Her firm is independent of this organization. She's been briefed on the general parameters of what I need." Margaret Cho extended her hand. Her grip was precise and brief. "I've heard good things about your analysis." "You've had 12 hours, Lena said. "Adrian called me last night," Margaret said without any particular emphasis. "I read what you put together. It's solid work." "What do you need from me to go further?" Lena asked. "Access to the specific financial systems you identified, the transaction records behind the extraction flows, and your timeline document the cross-reference you built between the shell company registrations and the payment dates." "I can have everything on an encrypted drive within the hour." Margaret nodded. "Good. I'll need 3 to 5 business days for the initial tracing. Depending on how deep the structures go, potentially a week beyond that." Lena looked at Adrian. "Victor will notice the forensic access. Some of these systems require administrative credentials that he manages." Adrian answered that before she finished the sentence. "I've arranged for IT to create a separate administrative pathway. Victor won't have visibility into the access logs." She had not expected him to have thought of that already. She recalibrated slightly. He was not someone who received information and waited for others to plan the response. He processed and acted. The 24 hours had not been hesitation. They had been preparation. "One more thing," Margaret said. She looked at Lena directly. "The pattern you identified, the shell structures, the extraction flows. This level of sophistication requires not just internal knowledge of the financial systems, but also knowledge of how the compliance reviews are conducted. Whoever built this knew exactly what the internal auditors were looking for and designed around it." "Yes," Lena said. "That means someone was either conducting the compliance reviews or had direct access to the methodology." "Or both," Lena said. Margaret let that land. Adrian said nothing. The three of them sat in the quiet of his office for a moment with the full weight of what that meant pressing down on the room. If Victor Kane had access to the compliance methodology, he had spent years designing an extraction that was specifically immune to the auditing process of the organization he was stealing from. He had been present for every internal review. He had shaped the review process itself. He had built the cage and made sure the cage had no door, until Lena looked at it from outside. "I'll get you the drive," Lena said. She left the office. She was back in 40 minutes. She handed Margaret the drive at the door, and they exchanged cell numbers, and Margaret left with the quiet efficiency of a person who had done this kind of work many times, and understood that speed and discretion were the same thing at this stage. Lena went back to her desk. She had other contracts to review. 6 waiting in the queue. She worked through them with the same methodical attention she always brought, and she found 2 problems in routine agreements and 1 significant issue in a commercial lease renewal that would have given the opposing party unusual early termination rights, and she documented everything clearly and sent it to the legal team. She did all of this while keeping a portion of her attention on the floor around her, on the sound of Victor Kane's voice down the hall, on the rhythm of the office, on the specific quality of normalcy that a person under pressure sometimes works very hard to maintain. Victor, so far as she could observe, was maintaining it perfectly. May. The first signal came on Monday. David Rice appeared in her doorway at 11 in the morning. He knocked on the open door, which was new. He had previously entered without knocking on his 2 previous visits, both times to deliver written challenges to her modification recommendations framed as professional questions. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He put a folder on his lap. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was now deciding whether to say it. "I want to be straight with you," he said. "Please." Victor asked me to review the compliance methodology last week, as a routine update. He said the board wanted a current summary of how internal auditing was conducted. Lena kept her expression neutral. Okay. I sent him the methodology document. David paused. I'm telling you because I think he asked for it specifically because of you, because of the archive review. She held his gaze. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm a lawyer, he said. And I know what it means when someone asks for a compliance methodology document the same week an independent review of historical records is authorized. He paused again. I don't know exactly what you found, but I know that whatever it is, someone is trying to understand how it was found so they can determine whether there's more. Lena sat with this for a moment. David, did you tell Victor you were coming to speak with me? No. Are you sure that's the choice you want to make? He looked at her directly. I work for this organization. Whatever's happening inside it, I work here. If something is wrong and I stayed silent, that's on me. A pause. I've spent 2 years building a career in this firm. I'm not going to watch it collapse because I made the wrong decision about what to ignore. She studied him. What she saw was not a converted ally. What she saw was a pragmatic person who had done the calculation and determined which side of a line was safer. She could work with that. Thank you for telling me, she said. I'm going to ask you to keep this conversation to yourself. Of course. And David. She held his gaze. The next time Victor asks you for anything related to compliance methodology, financial system access, or the archive review, you come to me before you respond to him. He hesitated for exactly 1 second. Agreed. He left. She sat at her desk and processed the information. Victor knew she was looking. Not specifically what she had found, but that she was looking. He had the compliance methodology, which meant he could identify whether his extraction structures fell within the gaps she might have accessed. He was at this moment, somewhere in this building, conducting his own analysis of his own exposure. She picked up her phone and texted Margaret Cho a single line. He may know the methodology. Accelerate if possible. Margaret's response came back in 4 minutes, already running. Found additional structures this morning. We'll call at 6. She set her phone down. She went back to work. Yet, Margaret's call at 6 o'clock lasted 40 minutes. The initial tracing is done, Margaret said. The full accounting will take longer, but I have enough for the picture. Tell me. $11.4 million over 6 years, not 4, 6. The earlier structures are buried deeper and took longer to identify, but they're there. A pause. The money traces through 4 layers of shell companies and terminates in 2 accounts, one in the Cayman Islands, one in Luxembourg. Lena wrote this down. Personal accounts. Not in his name. Beneficial ownership structures. But the beneficial owner documentation has a pattern, certain registered agents, certain law firm intermediaries that my firm has seen before. It's a signature, the kind that a forensic trail can follow to its source. Meaning, the beneficial owner can be identified. Given enough time and the right legal mechanisms, yes. Can you confirm it's Kane before we present this to Adrian? A pause. I can't give you absolute certainty without the beneficial ownership documentation. What I can tell you is that the transaction patterns on the extraction side are specifically aligned with administrative actions on the internal financial systems, and those administrative actions are logged to a single user credential set. Which credential set? Kane Victor J. A pause. He used his own credentials, not a proxy, not a compromised account, his own. Which means either he was supremely confident no one would ever look, or he made a mistake. Lena thought about this for a moment. Or both, she said. 20 years without detection does things to a person's risk calculation. That's been my experience, Margaret said. How long to complete the full accounting? 3 days, possibly 4. Send me what you have now, the preliminary figures and the credential logs. I'll encrypt and send tonight. Thank you, Margaret. She hung up. She sat in her apartment in the quiet of Monday evening and looked at her notes. $11.4 million. 6 years. Victor Kane's own credentials. Used without hesitation, without a proxy, without even the basic operational security of separating the action from the identity. She had been right. His confidence had become his blind spot. She opened her laptop and began drafting the preliminary presentation for Adrian. She worked for 3 hours. She made it clean and sequential. She made it unambiguous. She made it the kind of document that left no interpretive room. When she was done, she read it through twice and changed exactly 4 words. Then she sent it to herself from a personal email address, not her work account, and saved a copy to a cloud drive that had nothing to do with Volkov development. This was not paranoia. This was good practice. She presented the preliminary findings to Adrian Tuesday morning. She had asked for an hour. He cleared 90 minutes. She took him through everything. Margaret's tracing, the 6-year timeline, the 11.4 million, the 4 layers of shell structures, the accounts, the credential logs. She showed him the log entries. Victor Kane's user ID timestamped attached to administrative actions in the financial systems that coincided precisely with each extraction event. Adrian read every page. He read the credential logs 3 times. When he finished the last page, he set the document down with a control so precise it looked like stillness and was actually something else entirely. 6 years? He said. Yes. He was running this when we built the new port logistics division. Yes. He sat in every board meeting for 6 years. Yes. He handled my personal financial review last spring. Yes. She let the weight of each confirmation settle before answering the next one. She had learned that some things need to be absorbed in sequence. You cannot hand a person the full size of a betrayal at once. You have to let them see it piece by piece because the whole thing at once is too large to hold. Adrian stood up. He walked to the window and stood looking at the city for a long moment. She stayed in her chair and said nothing and let him have the 30 seconds that he needed. When he turned back, his face was the controlled face she had come to recognize. But there was something different behind it now, something that had been fully understood and fully absorbed and had now settled into a cold, clean resolve. I want to confront him, he said. Not yet. Her voice was firm. Margaret needs 3 more days. We need the complete accounting before any confrontation. If he's aware that he's been found before, you have everything. He will move the accounts. He will destroy records. He will build a narrative that gives him leverage. Leverage over what? She held his gaze. Over you. Over this organization. Over everything he knows about how this company has operated for 20 years. The silence was heavy. He'll try to use what he knows, she said. Not necessarily through official channels, but the threat of it, the implication of it. If he believes that exposure will destroy him, he will make sure the exposure is mutual. Adrian sat back down. You've thought about this carefully. I've thought about nothing else for 4 days. He looked at her with something that had moved past the controlled stillness entirely, something that was simply direct and human. What do you recommend? 3 more days. Margaret finishes the accounting. We have complete documentation. Then we confront him together with the full evidence in front of him. We give him the choice of cooperating with the government investigation voluntarily in exchange for whatever consideration his attorney can negotiate, or facing the full weight of the documentation without cooperation. She paused. And we control the narrative from the beginning. We go to the federal investigators ourselves. Before he does. With our own documentation, our own cooperation, our own timeline. You keep coming back to the investigators. Because that's where this ends regardless, she said. $11 million through offshore shell structures is not something that gets managed privately. The only question is whether you stand in front of it or get caught behind it. He was quiet for a long moment. He'll say I knew, Adrian said. Whatever deal he makes, whatever negotiation happens, he'll say I was aware. Yes, he will. She kept her voice steady. And we will have the documentation proving you brought this forward voluntarily. Engaged independent forensic accounting. Came to investigators without being compelled. She looked at him directly. That's not a guarantee, but it is the strongest possible position. He looked at the window, the city, the 22 floors of distance between this office and the ground. 20 years, he said quietly. Not to her, to himself. She said nothing. He was at my father's funeral, Adrian said. He handled the first restructuring. He negotiated the shipping contracts that kept this company alive in 2012, when we almost didn't survive. A pause. I trusted him more than I've trusted anyone in this world. Lena sat with that. She didn't rush it. I know, she said. You've been here 3 weeks. Yes. And you found what he hid for 6 years. I was looking at it from outside, she said. That's the only difference. He was invisible to the people inside because the people inside trusted him. Trust is a blind spot. He looked at her. You didn't trust him. I didn't know him well enough to trust him, and he told me on my first day that I didn't belong here. That's not what someone says when they're unconcerned about your presence. Something that was almost a ghost of a different expression moved across Adrian's face. He came to your office. My first afternoon. He didn't tell me that. No, I don't imagine he did. The silence stretched. Outside, somewhere far below them, Chicago was being its enormous, ordinary self. Traffic, people, the endless business of the city going about its life without any awareness of the conversation happening 22 floors up in a corner office. 3 more days, Adrian said. 3 more days. And then we do this the right way. Yes. He nodded once. She stood to leave. Lena. He said her name and she stopped. Does it ever occur to you that you walked into all of this because of a rainy Tuesday night and a bad contract? She looked at him. Yes, it occurs to me regularly. Does it concern you? She thought about it honestly. It would concern me more if I'd walked away from it, she said. She left. The 3 days were the longest of the entire ordeal. Not because nothing happened. Because too much happened, and none of it was visible on the surface. And that made every ordinary moment feel like it was sitting on top of something that had not yet decided how to break. Victor Kane was at his desk every morning before her. He attended every scheduled meeting with the same smooth authority he always carried. He spoke to her twice, once in the hallway when they passed a brief nod. Once when he stopped at her open door to mention entirely casually that the upcoming real estate portfolio review would require coordination with the legal team and she should expect documentation from David Rice by end of week. She thanked him and said nothing else. He held her gaze for a fraction of a second longer than the conversation required. Then he walked away. She called Margaret immediately after. He's performing normalcy, exceptionally well. The best ones always do, Margaret said. 2 more days. On Wednesday evening, David Rice appeared at her door again. This time he knocked harder. His face was different from Monday. The rehearsed quality was gone. He looked like a man who had stumbled onto something and was still absorbing the impact. Close the door, she said. He closed it. He sat down. He put both hands on his knees. Victor asked me today to prepare a legal opinion, David said, on whistleblower liability. Specifically, what protections exist for executives who voluntarily report internal financial misconduct to federal authorities before an investigation is initiated. Lena was very still. He framed it as a general inquiry, David said. Background research for a hypothetical client matter. But he asked me specifically, not the other associates, and he wanted it by tomorrow. She processed this in approximately 4 seconds. Victor was preparing to flip. He was researching the protections available to someone who reported misconduct voluntarily. He was considering whether to go to the government himself, not to confess, but to become the informant. To present himself as the person who brought the misconduct to light, which would require him to characterize it differently from how it actually was. He was planning to reframe $11 million of his own theft as evidence gathering. "Did you prepare the opinion?" she asked. "I started it. I haven't sent it yet." "Don't send it." She kept her voice even. "And David, don't destroy the request. Don't alter it. Don't reply to it. Do nothing until I tell you otherwise. He'll expect it by tomorrow. Tell him you need another day. Systems issue, document access, something plausible." She looked at him. "Can you do that?" He looked back at her. He was frightened. She could see it clearly. Not physically frightened. The kind of frightened that comes from a young career sitting on the edge of a decision that has no clean option. "Yes," he said. "Go home tonight," she said. "Don't answer any messages from Victor after 7 o'clock." He nodded and left. She called Adrian. "We need to move tomorrow," she said. "Margaret needs to give us whatever she has tonight. Victor is researching whistleblower protections. He's going to try to go to the government first." Adrian was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Can Margaret give us the accounting tonight?" "I don't know. I'm calling her next." "Call her, then call me back." She called Margaret. "I need everything you have, tonight, whatever stage it's at." "Lena, the full trace on the Luxembourg account isn't—" "Margaret, he's moving. Whatever you have is better than nothing. Send it now." A pause. "Give me 2 hours." "You have 90 minutes." She hung up and called Adrian back. 90 minutes. We meet tonight. My office, 8 o'clock. She was there at 7:50. Margaret's encrypted files arrived at 8:17. Lena printed everything on the secure printer in Adrian's executive suite. Margaret had the primary account identified, the 6-year transaction record complete, and the credential documentation fully compiled. The Luxembourg account beneficial ownership trace was 80% complete, not perfect, but more than sufficient. She laid it all on Adrian's conference table. He read it while she stood. She didn't sit. She was too wired for sitting. When he finished, he looked up. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Tomorrow morning. We call the Federal Financial Crimes Unit before 9 o'clock. "Yes." "And we confront Victor at 10. She hesitated. "I'd recommend calling the investigators first and getting guidance on the confrontation. They may want to handle it differently." He looked at her. "You want to hand it entirely to the government. I want to make sure whatever we do tomorrow doesn't compromise the investigation." She looked back at him steadily. "If Victor walks into a conversation tomorrow and realizes what's happening, he could move money, destroy records, or do something that contaminates the evidence chain. The investigators need to know our timeline before we act." He considered this. She watched him work through it. The part of him that had spent 20 years handling his own problems was in direct conflict with the part that understood what she was telling him. "All right," he said. She exhaled very slightly. "Federal Financial Crimes, 8:30 tomorrow morning." She nodded. He stood. He walked to the window. The city was dark, below lit from within the way. Cities are at night, the lights of a million individual lives pressing upward against the dark. "Lena." He didn't turn from the window when he said it. "What made you come to me immediately, the first morning? When you found the pattern. You could have taken longer. Confirmed more before you said anything." She thought about the honest answer. She gave it. "Because the moment I saw what it was every day, I stayed silent, was a day I was part of it." He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned from the window, and she saw in his face something she had not seen there before, and would not be able to completely name for a long time afterward. It was not gratitude exactly. It was not trust exactly. It was something that sits underneath both of those things and makes them possible. "Go home," he said. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be long." She gathered her notes. She put on her coat. She was at the elevator when she heard him speak again from the conference room. "Lena." She turned. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you should know that you are the most honest person I have ever encountered in this building." A pause. "Including myself." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Get some sleep, Adrian." She took the elevator down. She walked out into Chicago, and the cold air hit her, and the city moved around her the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and alive, and she walked 2 blocks before she stopped and stood on the sidewalk and let herself feel the full weight of what tomorrow was going to be. Tomorrow, she would help the man she worked for hand evidence of financial crimes to federal investigators. Tomorrow, she would be in the room when Adrian Volkov confronted the person who had sat beside him for 20 years and stolen from him for 6 of them. Tomorrow, everything that had been building since a rainy Tuesday night in the Blue Anchor Diner would break into the open. She thought about her mother, her brother Jamie, the insurance clause that destroyed one life and redirected another toward this sidewalk, this city, this moment. She thought about how a single piece of hidden language in the right document can change the shape of a life. She thought about the 2 copies she had locked in her desk, the cloud backup she had made without telling anyone. She thought about Victor Kane in his office tonight, wherever he was running his calculations, researching his options, planning his move. She thought about the 90-minute gap between her call to Margaret and the arrival of those files. The 2 hours she had asked Margaret to compress into 90 minutes. Victor Kane had 6 years of preparation. She had had 3 weeks. And she had still gotten there first. She put her hands in her coat pockets and walked toward the bus stop. Tomorrow morning, 8:30. She was ready. She didn't sleep. Not in the way that people say they didn't sleep when they mean they slept badly. She genuinely did not sleep. She lay in her bed and watched the hours move on the ceiling and ran calculations that had no resolution, and made tea at 2 in the morning and sat at her kitchen table with her notes and went through everything one more time. Not because she doubted the evidence. The evidence was solid. Margaret's accounting was thorough. The credential logs were unambiguous. The shell structure documentation was the kind of thing that federal financial crimes prosecutors built careers on. She went through it again because today, now in a few hours, she was going to sit in a room with people who carried the kind of power that could redirect the force of the United States government, and she was going to be the person who had put that sequence of events in motion. And she needed to be absolutely certain that every single fact she had presented was exactly what she said it was. It was. She knew it was. She made a second cup of tea she didn't drink and looked out her kitchen window at the pre-dawn street and thought about her mother. Not about the insurance clause, not about the medical bills. About a Tuesday afternoon when Lena was 9 years old and had come home from school and found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a letter from the electric company in her hands. And her mother had read the letter once and then set it down, and then looked at Lena with a face that was perfectly composed. "We have a problem," her mother had said. "Here's what we're going to do about it. Not I'm afraid. Not I don't know what to do. Not this might be too big for us. Here's what we're going to do." Lena sat at her own kitchen table at 3:15 in the morning and understood in the way that adult knowledge sometimes connects back to childhood memories and illuminates both of them simultaneously, that she had inherited something more durable than any career. She had inherited that particular form of composure, the kind that doesn't pretend the fear isn't there, the kind that acknowledges the size of the problem and moves forward anyway. She went back to bed at 4. She slept for 2 hours and 20 minutes. She woke up at 6:20 and got dressed with the deliberate care of someone who understood that clothing is armor in certain kinds of rooms. Dark blazer. The best professional clothes she owned, which were not expensive but were well chosen. The kind of outfit that said, "I am here on purpose, and I know exactly why." She was at the office at 7:30. Carol arrived at 7:40 and looked at her face and said nothing except, "Coffee is already on," which was all that needed to be said. At 8:15, Adrian came to her office door. He was dressed in the particular way she had come to recognize as his version of the same armor she had chosen. Dark. Precise. Nothing that could be read as casual. "Ready," he said. "Yes." They went to his office. He closed the door. The call to the Federal Financial Crimes Division was made at 8:32. She had prepared a summary document the night before. 2 pages. Precise. She had it in front of her. Adrian made the call himself, which she had advised. The person on the other end was a senior investigator named Thomas Greer, whom Adrian had been connected to through his attorney, whom he had called at 11 the previous night. She listened to Adrian lay out the situation in plain language. The forensic accounting findings, the credential documentation, the 6-year timeline, the $11.4 million. He cited Margaret Cho and her firm by name and offered to transmit the full documentation package immediately. He described the situation accurately, including the organizational role of the subject without editorializing. He was, she thought, extraordinarily good at this. At presenting difficult information without revealing the cost of it. At keeping his voice level when the thing he was describing was the 6-year betrayal of the man who had stood beside him since before this company was what it was. Investigator Greer asked several questions. Adrian answered each one. When a question required her input on the documentation structure, Adrian turned to her and she answered directly into the phone, identifying herself as the contract analyst whose initial review had triggered the investigation. Ms. Parker, Greer said. The initial identification of the extraction pattern was that within the scope of your authorized access to the archive records. Yes, she said. I was conducting a compliance review of historical records under direct authorization from the CEO. The pattern emerged from that review. And the forensic accounting was engaged at the CEO's direction following your initial findings. Correct. Good. A pause. I'm going to need the full documentation package transmitted through your attorney within the hour. We'll have a team in your building this afternoon. She felt Adrian go still beside her, not visibly, but she was attuned to him now in the way you become attuned to a person when you've spent weeks watching them process difficult information, and she felt the particular quality of stillness that meant he was absorbing a consequence that was real and immediate rather than theoretical. This afternoon, he said. We move quickly in these situations, Greer said. You understand why? Yes. Mr. Volkov, I want to be clear. Your proactive disclosure and cooperation are significant factors in how this investigation proceeds. That's not a guarantee of any particular outcome. It is an accurate description of how we weight voluntary cooperation. Understood. The call ended at 9:14. Lena set her notes down. Adrian set his phone down. They sat for a moment in the specific quiet of a thing that has been set in motion and can no longer be stopped. Federal investigators in the building this afternoon, he said. Yes. My people will see it. Yes, there's no way around that. He stood. He walked to the window. The Chicago morning was gray and flat, the kind of November sky that sits low over the city and makes everything feel close and contained. Victor will know the moment they arrive. That's why we confront him before they do. He turned from the window. Now. He nodded once. He picked up his phone and called Carol. Ask Victor to come to my office. Tell him it's about the port logistics review. He paused. And Carol closed the floor. Close the floor. I want the executive level cleared of non-essential personnel before he arrives. A brief pause on Carol's end. Then, yes, sir. He hung up. He looked at Lena. You stay in the room. She had not expected him to say anything else. Yes, whatever he says about you being here, whatever argument he makes about your role, I know. He's going to try to minimize you. It's the first thing he'll do. I know, she said again. Let him. It doesn't change the documents. They waited. The 8 minutes before Victor Kane knocked on the office door were some of the longest Lena had experienced since the 90 minutes she spent waiting for Margaret's files to arrive the night before. She used them to arrange the documentation on the conference table in the precise order she had planned. Primary findings first. Credential logs second. Transaction records third. Margaret's certified accounting summary fourth. She did not leave interpretation room. She built a path through the evidence that walked in one direction only. The knock came at 9:31. Come in, Adrian said. Victor entered. He was as always immaculate, controlled. He carried nothing in his hands, which she noted. He had not brought a folder or a phone or anything that could be read as preparation. He moved toward the conference table with the comfortable authority of a man who had walked into this office hundreds of times and had never once walked in unprepared. He saw the documents on the table. Something happened in his face. It was very brief, barely a flicker, but she had been watching for it, and she caught it the fraction of a second between seeing the arrangement of papers and reassembling the composed expression. He sat down across from Adrian. He did not look at Lena. "You wanted to discuss port logistics?" "No," Adrian said. A pause. "Then what are we doing?" Adrian set his hand on the documentation stack and slid it across the table. Victor looked down at it. He looked at the top page for a long moment. His face was very still. Then he looked up at Adrian with an expression that contained, she thought, several genuine emotions arranged in a careful sequence. Calculation first. Then, and this surprised her, something that looked almost like relief. The particular relief of a person who has been waiting a long time for a weight to land and has finally felt it arrive. "How long have you known?" Victor said. "Long enough." Victor nodded once, slowly. Then he looked at Lena for the first time since he entered the room. "You found it?" "Yes," she said. "How?" "Pattern recognition across the archive. The extraction structures were sophisticated, but they were consistent. Consistency is the thing that gives patterns away." He held her gaze for a moment. "I underestimated you," he said. The words were flat and without elaboration, not an apology, an assessment. "I know," she said. He looked back at Adrian. "What happens now?" "Federal investigators will be in this building this afternoon." The words landed. Victor absorbed them. She watched him run through what that meant, not the abstract consequence, but the specific, immediate logistical reality. His office, his files, his computer, his phone. The credential logs that she had already handed to the government through their attorney. "You went to them proactively," Victor said. "Yes." "Before talking to me?" "Yes." Something moved in Victor's expression. Not anger exactly. Something that carried more weight than anger. "Adrian, I have been with you for 20 years. I know. I built half of what this company is. I know that too. And you went to the government before you came to me." Victor's voice stayed level. "Barely. The control was still there, but the effort was visible now. You didn't ask me. You didn't give me the chance to—" "To what?" Adrian said. His voice was quiet. The specific quiet that she had first heard in the Blue Anchor Diner when he said one word to Marcus Hale and the word landed like something dropped from a building. "To explain, to negotiate, to tell me there's a reason you've been stealing from me for 6 years. There are things you don't understand about the position I've been in." "Tell me one thing," Adrian said. "One thing that explains $11 million. The silence was complete. Victor sat with his hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked up. "When your father died," he said, "I put this organization back together with nothing. You were 26 years old, and you didn't know how to run a company, and the people around you were circling, waiting to take what they could, and I held it together. For you." He paused. "For years. I held it together, and I watched you build it into something that generates hundreds of millions of dollars annually, and I never asked for more than my salary." "You took $11 million, Victor. I took what I calculated was owed." The words fell into the room like something detonating. Lena watched Adrian's face. She watched the thing behind his eyes. Not anger. Something colder and more permanent than anger. The specific expression of a person absorbing not just a betrayal, but the belief system behind it. The fact that Victor didn't believe it was theft. He believed it was a debt collected. "You calculated what was owed," Adrian said. "Yes." "Without asking. You wouldn't have said yes. So you decided for me." "Yes." The room was very still. Then Adrian said very quietly, "Get out of my building." Victor didn't move immediately. He sat for a moment longer with his hands on the table and his expression doing several things at once. Then he stood. He straightened his jacket. He was to the end impeccably composed. He looked at Lena one more time. Something passed across his face that she couldn't fully categorize. Not hostility, not respect. Something complicated and layered and very old. "You changed him," Victor said. "No," she said. "I didn't change anything. I showed him what was already there." Victor looked at her for one more second. Then he walked to the door. He opened it. He stopped. "You should know," he said without turning around, "that there are people who are unhappy about the changes here. People with more resources than Marcus Hale. People who have been watching what you've been doing in this building for weeks." A pause. "I am not a threat to you. I never was. The threat is coming from elsewhere." The door closed. The room was completely silent for 10 seconds. Then Lena said, "That wasn't a warning." "No," Adrian said. "It was a last card. He's telling us there's something worse coming, so that we think twice about how hard we push on him." "Yes." She looked at the closed door. "Is he right? Are there people watching?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. That was not comfortable. This organization has competitors who would benefit from instability. If word gets out that there's a federal investigation— "The Marcus Hale network," she said. He looked at her. "Marcus Hale's brother called you 3 weeks ago." "Yes. He mentioned complications. He said complicated before they happen." Adrian stood. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the conference table and the documents spread across it, and then at the window and the gray city beyond it. "I need to know if there's something specific, not a general threat, something specific." She thought about this. She thought about the call from Robert Hale, the timing of it. 3 weeks ago, which was less than a week after the Blue Anchor meeting and the day after Lena's first day in the office. He had called her before she had found the archive pattern, before the forensic accounting, before any of the current situation. He had called because Marcus Hale was already afraid of her specifically, which meant Marcus Hale already knew she was in the building, which meant someone had told him. She looked at Adrian. "Victor." He understood immediately. "Victor told Hale you were here. Before I found the archive pattern. Before any of this. He told Hale you had hired someone new to review contracts, and Hale panicked because his contract is the one that put all of this in motion." She worked through it quickly. Victor and Hale had an existing relationship. They didn't need to be partners in the extraction scheme for Victor to pass along information useful to Hale. They were using each other, Adrian said, separately. Victor for his own extraction, Hale for the managing partner trap. Both of them benefiting from the same vulnerability in your organization, the fact that you trusted Victor completely, and therefore nobody checked what Victor knew or said outside these walls. Adrian sat down. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead for exactly 2 seconds. Then he lowered his hand, and his face was composed again. "My attorney needs to know this before the investigators arrive," he said. "Yes, call him now." He called. He spent 12 minutes on the phone laying out the Victor Hale connection. His attorney's voice on the other end was quick and precise. When the call ended, Adrian set his phone down. "He says the investigators will want to know about the Hale connection immediately. It potentially extends the scope of the investigation." "That's good for you," she said. "The broader the scope of what you've brought to them voluntarily, the stronger your cooperation position." He looked at her. "You've thought about all of this." "I've been thinking about all of this since 3 in the morning." Something shifted in his expression. "You didn't sleep." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Lena, I need to ask you something directly." "Ask it." "Victor said there are people watching. Watching the changes here. Watching you." He held her gaze. "If the Hale Network is aware of your role in what happened at the Blue Anchor, and in what's happened since, you are not simply an analyst anymore. You are a person who has caused significant damage to interests that have significant resources. She understood what he was saying. She had understood it if she was honest with herself since Robert Hale's phone call 3 weeks ago. She had filed it in the category of things she could not control, and therefore would not spend energy fearing. But she had not ignored it. "I know," she said. "I want to make sure you know what that means practically. It means I should be careful. It means more than that." She looked at him directly. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" He held her gaze. "I'm telling you that the work you've done in this building over the past 3 weeks has made you visible to people who do not respond to visibility the way ordinary people do." The room felt different when he said it. Not because she hadn't understood it before. Because he was saying it out loud, and saying it out loud made it real in a different way from the way it had been real as a calculation. "What are you suggesting?" she said. "I'm not suggesting you stop," he said. "I'm not asking you to walk away from this. I'm telling you that I want you to have appropriate support, security awareness, whatever you need." She studied him. "This is the point where most people in your position would tell me to go home and stay there until it's over." "You're not most people," he said. "And this is not a situation where going home keeps you safer than staying engaged." She thought about that. "Victor said he was never the threat. Do you believe that?" "Victor was a thief," Adrian said. "Not a killer. His method was patience and financial manipulation. The Hale network is different. Marcus Hale has been running fraudulent infrastructure schemes connected to government contracts. The people who benefit from that operate at a different level of response." The weight of what he was describing settled over the room. She made a decision. "I'm not stopping," she said. "I know. But I want full information, whatever you know about the Hale network and who's connected to it. Not what you think I need to know. Everything." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tonight," he said. "After the investigators leave." "Tonight," she agreed. The federal investigators arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. There were 4 of them. Thomas Greer led the team, a compact, methodical man in his 50s, with the particular quality of attention that experienced investigators develop. He shook Adrian's hand and Lena's hand with equal formality. He accepted the documentation package from Adrian's attorney. He asked several clarifying questions to which Lena provided direct answers. The executive floor, already cleared of non-essential personnel, had the quality of a held breath. She could feel the building aware of what was happening, even though most of the people in it could not see it directly. These things travel through walls, through the particular way that administrative staff answer phones when something is wrong, through the way certain doors that are normally open are suddenly closed. Victor Kane had left the building at 9:52. She knew this because Carol told her quietly at 10 o'clock. He had taken nothing from his office. He had stopped at his assistant's desk and said something brief that his assistant later described as, "I won't be coming back after today." He had walked to the elevator with the same immaculate composure he carried into every room he ever entered. She had not seen him leave. But she felt it. The federal team spent 3 hours in the building. They accessed the financial systems with credentials Adrian's IT team provided. They collected the physical documentation. They had a second conversation with Lena in the presence of Adrian's attorney, during which she walked them through her initial pattern identification, the specific archive records she had accessed, and the sequence that led to engaging Margaret Cho. Thomas Greer asked her one question at the end of the session that she had not anticipated. "Ms. Parker, when you identified the extraction pattern, what made you bring it to Mr. Volkov immediately, rather than waiting to compile more evidence?" She thought about it for a moment, about her mother at the kitchen table, about the Tuesday night in the Blue Anchor with a coffee pot in her hand and a choice she couldn't unmake, about the thing she had told David Rice in her office. "Because every day I stayed silent was a day I was part of it," she said. Greer looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something in his notes. The investigators left at 5:20. The building exhaled. At 5:40, David Rice appeared in her doorway. He looked pale and tired, and something else she took a moment to identify. Resolved. The look of someone who had been afraid for a while and had come out the other side of it into a clearer place. I have the legal opinion Victor requested, he said. I never sent it. Good. What do I do with it? Hold it. Don't destroy it. The investigators may want it as evidence of Victor's state of mind before the confrontation. He nodded. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Is it over? She looked at him honestly. The first part is, she said. His expression registered what that meant. There's another part. There's always another part, she said. He left. She sat at her desk in the quiet of the after-hours building and allowed herself for the first time since the morning to simply sit. Not to analyze. Not to plan. Just to be present in the aftermath of a day that had been one of the most consequential of her life, without any of the obvious markers of consequence. No dramatic scenes, no confrontations that went the wrong way. Just careful, methodical work and the steady accumulation of truth until the weight of it became impossible to hold anywhere except in the open. She thought about what Victor had said at the door. There are people who are unhappy about the changes here. She thought about the changes. She thought about the fact that she had been in this building for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of reviewing contracts and identifying problems and submitting documentation to federal investigators and sitting in rooms with the most powerful man she had ever met and telling him things he needed to hear whether or not they were easy. 3 weeks. She thought about the Blue Anchor Diner, the backed-up floor drain, Dawn saying better than this place deserves. She thought about the coffee pot in her hand and the clause in Section 7 and the way a single sentence spoken in the right moment at the right time in the right room can redirect the entire current of a life, not just hers. She was still at her desk when Adrian appeared in her doorway at 6:15. He had his coat on. He looked for the first time since she had known him like a man who was tired. Not defeated, not broken. Just tired in the way that people get tired when they've carried something very heavy for a very long time and have finally set it down, and their arms don't know yet how to feel empty. Come have dinner, he said. She looked at him. Dinner. It's 6 o'clock. You haven't eaten since this morning, neither have I, and I told you tonight I would tell you everything about the Hale Network. He paused. We can do that at a restaurant. She looked at her desk, at the notes, at the cleared documents, and the empty space where the evidence package had sat before the investigators took it. Dinner, she said again. Just dinner, he said. Something in the way he said it was different from his usual precision, quieter, more careful. The voice of a man choosing his words with the specific care of someone who knows a line is being approached and is not certain whether to approach it. She picked up her coat. Not the Blue Anchor, she said. Something moved across his face. The ghost of an expression she hadn't seen there before. No, he said. Not the Blue Anchor. They took the elevator down together. The city met them at the ground level with its usual indifference and enormousness. Cold air, the smell of the lake somewhere in it. She walked beside him through the lobby and out through the glass doors and into Chicago, and she was aware, in the way that awareness sometimes arrives sideways rather than directly, that the space between them on that sidewalk was different from the space that had existed between them in the Blue Anchor Diner, or in his conference room, or across his desk. Not the space between an employer and an analyst. Something else. Something that didn't have a clean name yet and didn't need one. Not yet. She put her hands in her coat pockets and fell into step beside him and let the city move around them. She thought about what Victor had said at the door. She thought about the people who were watching. She thought about the fact that the Marcus Hale Network had resources and had already shown through Robert Hale's call that they knew who she was and where she was and what she had done. She thought about Adrian telling her the threat was real and her telling him she wasn't stopping. She thought about all of it, and she kept walking. Because this is what her mother had taught her. You don't know how yet. That's fine. You figure out how, and then you handle it. She was still figuring out how, but she was already handling it. And whatever came next, whatever the Hale Network had planned, whatever the investigation uncovered, whatever the city decided to throw at a woman who had walked into the wrong diner on a rainy Tuesday night and refused to walk away from what she saw. She would handle that too. One careful step at a time. The restaurant Adrian chose was quiet and small and on a side street off Michigan Avenue that most people walked past without looking at. Not the kind of place that announced itself. The kind of place that existed for people who already knew it was there. They sat at a corner table, not the back-to-wall position he always chose in unfamiliar rooms. A table near the window which she noticed and understood as a choice that meant something, even if neither of them named what it meant. He ordered wine. She ordered water and then changed her mind and said she'd have whatever he was having. He looked at her when she said that. Brief, but she caught it. They were quiet for a moment after the server left. The comfortable kind of quiet that two people only reach after they have been through something significant together and come out the other side still intact. The Hale Network, she said. Because this was why they were here. The other thing, the thing in the space between them on the sidewalk that could wait. She was good at letting things wait until they were ready to be named. He set his coat over the back of his chair. Marcus Hale is not the principal. He's a layer. A well-compensated, moderately sophisticated layer in a structure that goes considerably higher. How high? Government contracting, the infrastructure development sector, multiple cities, not just Chicago. He looked at her. The port expansion project was one piece of a pattern that has been running for at least a decade. Federal money redirected through shell subcontractors to private accounts. The principals are people with long-standing relationships to government procurement offices. She absorbed this. That's why the liability trap in the managing partner clause was so carefully constructed. They've done it before. Several times. Different companies. Different managing partners. The contracts change hands, the liability clause activates. Someone takes the fall, and the principals are clean. And you were next. I was next. He said it without self-pity, simply acknowledging the geometry of it. My construction credentials and my city registry certifications made me the ideal target. The liability would have landed on someone whose background already invited scrutiny. She looked at him directly. They chose you specifically because the government would be more interested in prosecuting you than in following the money. Yes, she sat with that for a moment. The specific ugliness of it. The deliberate construction of a fall guy out of a person's history. Robert Hale's call, she said. 3 weeks ago, he was trying to find out what you knew and whether I could be used as a channel for negotiation. Yes? Meaning the principals were already nervous after the Blue Anchor meeting fell apart. Meaning the principals had a timeline, Adrian said. The port expansion contract needed a signature. When Marcus left that diner without one, they had a problem. They needed either a new target or a way to neutralize the complication. The complication being me. The complication being you. The wine arrived. She held her glass without drinking it and looked at the table and thought about the full shape of what she had walked into. Not accidentally, not innocently. She had walked into it with both eyes open on a rainy Tuesday night when she could have walked away, and she had stayed in it for 3 weeks with both eyes open, and the shape of it was larger and more deliberately constructed than she had understood until this moment. Victor told them, she said. When he called Hale after my first day. He didn't just say there was a new analyst. He said specifically who I was and what I'd done at the Blue Anchor, which gave the principals the information they needed to start considering their options regarding you. She set her wine glass down. What options are we talking about? He looked at her steadily. Nothing has happened, Lena. I know nothing has happened. I'm asking what they're considering. He was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a man deciding how honest to be about something that frightens him in a category different from normal business risk. There have been communications, he said. My security team monitors certain channels. In the last 10 days, your name has appeared in 3 separate monitored communications connected to interests associated with the Hale Network. She felt her chest tighten by a fraction. What kind of communications? The kind that ask questions about a person's daily patterns, their home address, their family. He paused. Their vulnerabilities. The table went very still. She thought about Jamie. 19 years old, taking community college classes, working at a hardware store on weekday evenings. She thought about her mother in the small house in Evanston. She kept her voice level. "When were you going to tell me this?" "Tonight, as I promised." "You knew before tonight." "I knew the shape of it 3 days ago. I didn't know the specific targeting detail until last night." "Last night?" She looked at him. "When you called Margaret to accelerate the forensic accounting?" "Yes." "You accelerated the timeline not just because Victor was researching whistleblower protections. You accelerated it because you knew there was a window closing." "Yes." She understood. He had been running 2 calculations simultaneously, the legal strategy and the security strategy. And he had not told her about the second one because telling her would have changed the way she operated in the building, and he needed her to operate exactly the way she naturally operated, which was the only way the legal strategy worked. She understood it. She didn't like it. "You made a decision about what I needed to know," she said. "Yes." "Without asking me." The words sat between them. He recognized them. She saw him recognize them. The echo of the same words he had said to Victor Kane 6 hours earlier. "You decided for me." Without asking. "It's not the same," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It's not the same. But the principle is." He looked at her with the locked door eyes, except the door was slightly more open than it had been on that Tuesday night. 3 weeks of her had opened it by a degree that was visible to her now, even if it probably wasn't visible to anyone else. "You're right," he said. "I should have told you sooner." She held his gaze. "Yes, you should have." A pause. "Tell me everything now." He told her. The monitoring data. The 3 communications. The specific questions that had been asked about her. The assessment his security team had made about the level of active threat versus surveillance threat. Their recommendation, which was that she needed a security protocol and possibly a temporary change of address. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "My brother." "Already handled," he said immediately. "As of this morning, without alarming him, his workplace and his school have discreet additional attention." She stared at him. "As of this morning?" "Yes." "You arranged security for my brother this morning without telling me." "I arranged security for your brother this morning because the alternative was telling you at 8:15 before a federal call and a confrontation with Victor and an afternoon with investigators, and I needed you clear and focused for all of those things, and telling you your family was being watched would have made you anything but clear and focused." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the table for a moment. He was right. She knew he was right. It didn't make it easier to sit with. "My mother," she said. "Also this morning." She looked up. He held her gaze without flinching. He had anticipated this conversation. He had prepared for it. He had made decisions about her life and the lives of the people she loved, because he was the kind of person who saw the full board and moved pieces accordingly. And she was smart enough to know that was exactly the quality she needed on her side right now, and also complicated enough as a human being to resent it simultaneously. "You should have told me," she said again, quieter this time. "Yes," he said again, quieter too. A silence. "Is my family safe?" she said. "Yes." "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. My security team is very good." She picked up her wine glass. She drank. She set it down. She looked at the window and the street beyond it, and the city going about its ordinary life in the November dark. "What happens next?" she said. "With the investigation, with the principals." "Investigator Greer called my attorney at 4 o'clock. The scope of the investigation is expanding. The Hale Network connection opens federal jurisdiction across multiple states. Marcus Hale's attorney contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. He's cooperating. Rapidly. She thought about this. Marcus Hale had spent 3 weeks watching his professional world collapse after the Blue Anchor meeting. His brother had called her. His attorney was now talking to federal prosecutors at 4 in the afternoon on the same day the forensic accounting landed with federal investigators. He had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it had dropped today with enough force to shake the building. "The principals will know by tomorrow morning," she said. "Tonight, more likely." "Which means the window you were worried about gets shorter," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "I'm not going to a safe house, Adrian." "I know. I'm not disappearing from the office." "I know that too." "Then tell me what you actually need from me, because I can feel you working towards something, and I'd rather you just say it." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that a person gives when they are deciding whether to show something they normally keep behind the locked door. "I need you to trust me," he said. "On the security piece. Not on the legal strategy, you own that, and you've been right about every call you've made. On the security piece, I need you to follow my team's guidance and not fight the protocol." "Why?" "Because my team knows what they're doing, and you don't in this specific area, and the cost of being wrong is one I'm not willing to pay." The last sentence came out differently from the others, more direct, more personal. It sat between them on the table, and neither of them immediately addressed what it meant that it had been said that way. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He released a breath that was so slight she almost missed it. "Okay," he said. They ate. They talked about the investigation, about the documentation, about the questions Greer would likely bring back about the shape of the next several weeks. The conversation was professional, and it was also something else underneath the professional, the way a foundation exists underneath a building. You don't see it, but everything rests on it. They walked out at 9 o'clock. The security team was present in a way she was now aware of, even if she hadn't been before. 2 cars. 4 people she had been seeing for weeks and not quite registering. She registered them now. He walked her to her car. She hadn't asked him to. He did it without asking. When they reached her car and she turned to say goodnight, he was close enough that she was aware of the specific quality of closeness and what it did to the air between them. "Lena," he said. "Adrian." A pause. "This isn't the moment," he said. She looked at him. "No, it isn't." "But there will be a moment." She held his gaze. "Let's get through the next few weeks first." Something moved across his face. Not disappointment. Something warmer than that. Patience, maybe. The particular patience of a person who has decided something and is willing to wait for the right conditions, because some things are worth waiting for. "Good night," he said. "Good night." She got in her car. She drove home. She checked her phone and found a text from Jamie that said, "Hey, random question. Does your company do corporate security stuff? Because there are 2 guys outside the hardware store who look like they're waiting for someone, and it's been like 3 hours. She texted back, "Yes, don't worry. We'll explain later. They're there for you." And his response was a single bewildered emoji that made her laugh out loud in her car, which surprised her, the laugh. The realness of it. She sat in her car outside her building for a moment. She thought about all of it. Then she went inside, and she slept for 7 hours without interruption. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of her life, not because of danger the security protocol held. The monitoring channels that Adrian's team watched went quiet on her name, within 48 hours of the federal investigation going active, which Greer's team explained was consistent with the principals going to ground rather than escalating. People running large-scale government fraud do not add federal witness tampering to their exposure when they're already looking at serious time. They go quiet and they lawyer up and they wait to see how much the government actually has. The government had a great deal. She knew this because she was at Thomas Greer's specific request, and with Adrian's attorney present, a consulting resource for the investigation. Not a witness in the conventional sense. A person who could explain the documentation, the contract structures, the liability transfer mechanisms, the extraction patterns in language that prosecutors could understand and use. She spent 4 mornings in a federal building on Dearborn Street, explaining things that she had first understood in a law school classroom 7 years ago, then applied to a 50-page thesis, then used on a Tuesday night in a roadside diner. Greer told her on the third morning that her analysis of the managing partner clause was the clearest explanation of that type of liability transfer mechanism he had encountered in 11 years of financial crimes investigation. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "I was going to be," she said. He looked at her over the top of his coffee cup. "What happened?" "Life," she said, "and a contract with a bad clause." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Well, it seems to have worked out." She didn't respond to that, but she thought about it for the rest of the day. Marcus Hale pled guilty to 3 counts of federal fraud in the third week. His cooperation agreement required full disclosure of the principal network, which meant names and accounts and documented transaction histories going back 8 years. His attorney negotiated a sentence recommendation that Lena was not privy to and didn't ask about. Victor Kane retained a criminal defense attorney of significant reputation and made no public statement. The forensic accounting Margaret Cho completed identified $13.2 million in total extraction, not 11.4. The additional $2 million had been in a third account that the initial tracing hadn't reached. Victor's attorney entered into preliminary cooperation discussions with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the second week. She heard about these developments through Adrian and through his attorney, who had become a regular presence in her professional life. She processed each piece of information with the same methodical attention she brought to everything and filed it appropriately and kept working. Because there was a great deal of work, the investigation had created turbulence within Volkov Development Group. Not criminal exposure, the proactive disclosure and cooperation had built the protective structure she'd envisioned. But turbulence, uncertainty among staff, questions from banking partners, a real estate deal that needed renegotiation because the counterparty got nervous when the news broke that the company was connected to a federal investigation, even as the cooperating party rather than the target. She handled the renegotiation herself. She sat across from the counterparty's legal team for 2 hours and walked them through the specific nature of the investigation, the company's cooperation position, and the contractual protections that existed in the deal structure. She answered every question directly. She did not minimize or spin. She gave them the factual picture and let the facts do the work. The deal was resaved, better terms than the original, because the other side had been so thoroughly impressed by her preparation that their lead attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Patricia Dowell, asked her afterward if she was taking outside clients. "I'm employed," Lena said. "I can see that," Patricia said. "I'm still asking." She told Adrian about this on the elevator back up to their floor. He listened without expression. "Patricia Dowell asked if you were taking outside clients," he said. "Yes." "What did you say?" "I said I was employed." A pause. The elevator moved. "You could have your own firm eventually," he said, not casually, with the specific weight of a sentence that had been thought about before it was spoken. "Not now, but eventually." She looked at him. "I know. I'm not trying to keep you here indefinitely. I know that too. I'm saying that what you're building here, the reputation, the specific expertise, it travels. When you're ready to use it somewhere else or build something of your own, it travels with you." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" He met her eyes. "Because the people who have worked for me in the past stayed because they were afraid to leave. I don't want that." A pause. "I want you here because you choose to be here. Every day." The elevator stopped. The doors opened. She stepped out. She looked back at him. "Today, I choose to be here," she said. He held her gaze. "Good," he said. "Today is enough." She walked down the hall to her office. She sat at her desk. She pulled up the contract queue. 6 waiting. She opened the first one. She started reading. The moment that changed everything for the second time came on a Wednesday evening 6 weeks after the Blue Anchor night, and it came not in a conference room or a federal building or an executive suite, but in the parking structure on Wacker, where she kept her car. She was walking to the elevator when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. "Ms. Parker." A man's voice. She didn't recognize it. Smooth, practiced, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand something very clearly. She stopped walking. Who is this? Someone who has been watching your work with significant interest. A pause. You've been very effective. The Hale situation, the Kane situation, the federal cooperation, very tidy. Another pause. The people who are unhappy about that would like you to understand that effectiveness has a ceiling. Her heart rate had increased by a precise, measurable amount. She was aware of it, and she chose not to let it affect her voice. Is this a threat? It's information. There are interests who believe that what's happened in the past 6 weeks is a contained situation, a localized problem that has been addressed. They are willing to accept that. A pause. What they are not willing to accept is the investigation expanding. The names that Marcus Hale has provided are at the moment limited in scope. If that scope expands, he paused again. Things become uncomfortable for more people. I don't control the scope of the federal investigation. No, but you control the quality of documentation available to the investigators, and the quality of the analysis that makes documentation usable. A pause. You're very good at that, Ms. Parker. The investigators said so themselves. She felt cold. He had information about what happened inside the federal building on Dearborn Street. That was not public. That was not leaked. That was the kind of information that came from someone with proximity to the investigation itself. I want you to think about your brother, the voice said. Community college, hardware store on evenings, 19 years old, your mother in Evanston, retired, small house, 2 cats. A pause. Good people. Ordinary lives. People who don't deserve complications. She stood completely still in the parking structure. Every calculation she was capable of ran simultaneously. The security protocol. Adrian's team. Jamie's texts. Her mother in the small house. The 2 cats she hadn't known her mother had. The voice describing them with the casual specificity of someone reading from a file. I understand what you're telling me, she said. Good, I thought you might. You're a smart woman. A pause. I'll call again in 72 hours. I trust you'll have thought carefully by then about the difference between necessary and unnecessary exposure. The line went dead. She stood for exactly 4 seconds. Then she called Adrian. He picked up on the first ring. Lena, I just received a call. She kept her voice steady. She walked as she talked, not back to the elevator, but to her car, because movement was better than standing still. Unknown number. A man. He knew about the federal sessions. He knows about Jamie, my mother, her house. A pause. He wants me to limit the documentation scope. Silence on Adrian's end. The specific silence of a man who is running through consequences at speed. Where are you right now? Parking structure. Get in your car. Don't go home. Come back up to the office. Adrian. Lena. Please. She got in the car. She went back up. His office was lit. His security chief, a lean man named Paul, who she had seen on the perimeter of most significant events in the past 6 weeks, was already there. 2 phones on the conference table. An open laptop. She told them everything. Every word she remembered. The voice, the pacing of it. The specific details about Jamie and her mother and the 2 cats. Paul recorded her account. He asked precise questions. When he was finished, he made a call that he conducted in a clipped professional shorthand. She could follow enough to understand was about locating the call origin and activating something he referred to as elevated protocol at both family locations. When Paul stepped out to make additional calls, she was alone with Adrian. She was very still. He came around the conference table and stood in front of her and looked at her face and said, "Are you all right?" Not a question. A direct inquiry from one person to another. "Yes," she said. Then, "No, not entirely." She paused. He knew about the sessions in the federal building. That means there's a leak in or near the investigation. Yes. I need to tell Greer. Paul is calling him now. This morning's session. I gave them 3 additional contract documents this morning. If someone inside the investigation is passing information to the principals, Greer needs to know tonight. Paul will make sure he does. She nodded. She took a breath. She was processing the fear the way she processed everything else, not by suppressing it, but by running it through the analytical system and coming out the other side with actionable information instead of paralysis. It took her approximately 45 seconds. He said 72 hours, she said. I know. He expects me to use that time to decide whether to cooperate with whatever they're asking. Yes. They think I can be pressured through my family. Yes. She looked at Adrian directly. I need my family safe. That's not negotiable, and it's not something I'm going to let you manage without telling me about it this time. I need to know what's happening when it's happening, and I need to be able to speak to Jamie and my mother directly. Agreed. And then I need to know your honest assessment of what they can actually do, not the optimistic version, the real version. He looked at her steadily. The call was designed to frighten you. The specificity about your family, the cats, the address, that's a demonstration of access, not a demonstration of intent. People who intend to harm don't announce it 72 hours in advance and then wait for your cooperation. You're saying it's a bluff. I'm saying the threat model here is intimidation, not action. They want you to pull back voluntarily. The moment they escalate beyond intimidation, their exposure increases dramatically. They are already under federal scrutiny. Adding witness intimidation to their situation is not a rational move for people trying to minimize exposure. But not impossible. Not impossible, he agreed, which is why the protocol matters. She sat down. She pressed her fingertips together and looked at the conference table and thought about 72 hours and what they actually were. 72 hours of someone waiting to find out if Lena Parker could be scared into silence. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table. Here's what we're going to do. I'm calling Greer directly, she said. Not through the attorney. Directly, tonight. He may not answer it. He gave me his direct number, she said. In the second session, he said if anything unusual happened, call immediately. She looked at Adrian. I'd say this qualifies. He held her gaze. Then, call him. She called. Greer picked up on the third ring. She told him about the call in the same precise, sequential way she told everything. Every word, every specific detail about Jamie and her mother. The 72-hour timeline, the reference to the federal sessions. Greer listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a pause. Ms. Parker, he said, this is a significant development. I know. The reference to the sessions suggests a security concern on our end that I need to address immediately. Yes. I want you in my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, not Dearborn Street. A different location. I'll text the address to this number. I'll be there. Don't use the same route you've used previously. Understood. And Ms. Parker. A pause. Don't pull back from the documentation. Whatever they've told you, don't pull back. I wasn't planning to, she said. A beat of silence. Then, I know, I'm saying it anyway. She hung up. She looked at Adrian. Tomorrow morning, she said. 8 o'clock. I'll have someone drive you. She started to say she didn't need that, and then she thought about 72 hours and the 2 cats and the specific calculation he had walked her through about threat model versus intimidation, and she said, okay. He nodded. He sat down across from her. The office was quiet. The city was dark outside the window. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and neither of them had eaten since the restaurant the night before, and she was aware of being tired in the bone-deep way of a person who has been running at full capacity for a sustained period and is approaching the edge of sustainable. Lena, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to continue with this, he said. The investigation doesn't require you specifically. Greer's team can work with the documentation. Margaret's accounting stands on its own. You've done— Don't, she said. He stopped. Don't tell me what I've done enough of, she said. Don't make the decision for me about when I've contributed sufficiently. Don't decide that the moment it gets difficult, it's time to protect me from it by suggesting I walk away. He held her gaze. I walked up to your table in a diner, she said, with a coffee pot in my hand, and I told you your contract was a trap when every rational instinct I had said to walk away. That was my choice. Every decision I've made since then has been my choice. She paused. This one is too. The silence stretched. The woman who is going to change this city, he said quietly, is sitting across from me. She looked at him. The city doesn't need to be changed, she said. It needs to be kept honest. That's different. Something moved across his face. Not the locked door expression. Not the controlled stillness. The real thing underneath all of that. The thing that had been accumulating for 6 weeks of conference rooms and parallel walks and honest conversations, and the specific weight of being seen by another person who has no interest in seeing anything other than what's actually there. Yes, he said. It is different. They sat with that for a moment. Go home, she said. Sleep. I was going to say the same to you. I'll go home when Paul says the protocol is confirmed. That'll be 20 minutes. Then I'll leave in 20 minutes. He nodded. He stood. He put on his coat. He stopped at the door. Lena. She looked at him. When this is over, he said. The investigation, the principles, all of it. He paused. I want to have a different conversation. She held his gaze. When it's over, she said. He left. She sat in his office for 22 minutes until Paul knocked and told her the protocol was confirmed and a car was ready. She went home. She called Jamie, who answered immediately, and she told him enough to make sense of the security presence without frightening him more than necessary. His response was to ask if she was okay, and when she said yes, he said, "You know, you're kind of terrifying, right?" And she laughed again, the same real laugh as the night before, which surprised her the same way. She called her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring. I know about the cars, her mother said immediately. Lena closed her eyes. I was going to explain. I figured it out myself. The same way you figure things out. Your grandmother used to say you got that from me. A pause. Are you safe? Yes. Are you sure? Yes, Mom. A long pause. Then her mother said, Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Lena sat in the quiet of her apartment. She thought about all of it. The blue anchor, the coffee pot, Section 7, the archive, Victor's face at the conference table, the federal building on Dearborn, the call in the parking structure, the 72 hours, Adrian at the door saying when it's over. Yes, she said, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Good, her mother said. Then handle it. The investigation into the Hale Principal Network ran for 4 months. She was present for most of it in the particular way that she had been present for everything. Not at the center, but as the person who understood the architecture. 7 individuals were charged across 3 states. The port expansion scheme was traced back 9 years and 11 separate fraudulent contracts. The liability transfer mechanism she had identified on a rainy Tuesday night in the Blue Anchor Diner became, in the language of the federal indictment, the defining instrument of a conspiracy that had stolen over $200 million from government infrastructure programs across the Midwest. Marcus Hale received a sentence recommendation of 4 years through his cooperation agreement. Victor Kane cooperated fully and received a recommendation of 6 years. The principals received significantly more. The leak inside the federal investigation turned out to be a paralegal in a connected law firm who had been passing information to the principals for 18 months. Greer's team identified him within 4 days of her call. He was arrested on a Friday morning, and his name appeared in the papers by the afternoon. No one called her back after the 72 hours. No one needed to. The principal network had 100 problems by then, and she had stopped being the most urgent one. Volkov Development Group emerged from the investigation with its legitimacy, not just intact, but substantially reinforced. The proactive cooperation had done exactly what she said it would do. Adrian's position in the city's business community shifted in a way that was difficult to quantify, but completely visible to anyone paying attention. He was still powerful. He was still someone people were careful with. But the nature of the care had changed. He was no longer someone people were careful with because they were afraid. He was someone people were careful with because they respected him. She had watched that change happen in real time. She had been part of the reason it happened. She hired 2 junior analysts in the 4th month, not to replace her work, but to build a proper contract review function that could sustain itself. She trained them herself with the same precision and honesty she brought to everything. She told them on their first day that the most important skill in contract analysis was not legal knowledge. It was the willingness to say what you saw, even when what you saw was inconvenient. Patricia Dowell called her twice more. The second time she made a specific offer. A consulting arrangement. 2 days a week working on complex contract matters for Dowell's firm. She took it to Adrian. He read the offer summary she handed him. He set it down. "Are you asking my permission?" he said. "I'm being transparent," she said. "It's how I operate." He held her gaze. "Take it." "It doesn't conflict with my work here." "I know it doesn't. Take it." A pause. "Patricia Dowell is very good. The work will be useful to you." She looked at him for a moment. "You're building something," she said. "What do you mean?" "You're building a version of my future, deliberately. You're encouraging the outside work, and the reputation development, and the professional expansion, because you've decided that's the right thing for me, and you're doing it without telling me that's what you're doing." He met her eyes steadily. "Is that wrong?" She thought about it. About the line between someone making decisions for you and someone creating conditions that serve you. About the difference between Victor's calculated debt collection and whatever this was. "No," she said. "It's not wrong, but I see it." "I know you do," he said. "You see everything." She took the Dowell arrangement. 6 months after the Blue Anchor night, she was sitting at her desk at Volkov Development Group on a Thursday morning when Carol knocked and said there was a call from Northwestern Law School's Continuing Legal Education office. She stared at the phone for a moment before she answered it. The director of the CLE program had read coverage of the federal investigation. He had specifically read the sections that described the analysis of the liability transfer mechanism. He was calling to ask if she would be willing to deliver a lecture series on hidden liability structures in government contracting. "I'm not a licensed attorney," she said. "No," he said. "But you're the person who identified and documented the most significant liability transfer fraud in Midwest federal contracting history. That's not a credential. That's better than a credential." She told him she would think about it. She told Adrian that evening. They were in his office at the end of the day, which had become a regular occurrence without either of them formally naming it as such. 20 minutes at the end of the workday, where they talked about things that were and were not about work in approximately equal measure. "Northwestern," he said. "The law school." "Your law school." "The one I didn't finish," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "How does that feel?" Being asked back by them. She thought about it honestly. "Strange," she said. "Like a door I thought was closed from the outside, turns out to have been closed from the inside." "Will you do it?" "I think so." A pause. "Yes." He looked at her with the expression she had come to know as the one beneath all the others, the real one. "Good." She looked back at him. "Adrian, you said when it's over." "Yes. It's over." The room went quiet, in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something that has been approaching for a long time finally arrives. "Yes," he said. "It is." "Then I believe you mentioned a different conversation." He stood. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her with the same closeness that had existed on the sidewalk 6 weeks ago when neither of them had named what was in the space between them, because the timing wasn't right. The timing was right. "I am not a simple man," he said. "I know that. My world is complicated, even the cleaned-up version of it. I know that too. You could have a much easier life than the one that comes with knowing me." She looked at him directly. "I could have a much quieter life. I don't think easier is the right word, and I'm not particularly interested in quiet." Something moved across his face, something that started behind the locked door and came all the way through. "No," he said. "You are definitely not." She held his gaze. "You are the most complicated person I have ever met," she said. "You make decisions without telling people. You arrange security for families without consulting them. You build people's futures in the background, like a contractor working without a permit." A pause. "You also read every document I put in front of you, with complete attention. You say exactly what you mean. You held still while I told you things that hurt you because you understood they were true. And you sent someone to watch my brother before I even knew there was something to watch him for." He was very still. "I see all of it," she said. "Not the version you show the world, not the version your enemies built. All of it. The real thing." "Yes," he said. "You do." "I've always seen it," she said. "Since the Blue Anchor." "I know," he said. "That's why." She understood what he meant. That was why he had put the business card on the table. That was why he had said not anymore when she described herself as a waitress in a roadside diner. That was why he had told her in a hotel restaurant over wine she'd only half drunk that she was the most honest person he had ever encountered in that building, including himself, because she saw him. And nobody had done that in a very long time. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, and he went completely still, in the way of a man who was not accustomed to being touched with gentleness and had forgotten what it felt like. "The different conversation," she said. "Yes," he said. "We're having it." "Yes," he said. "We are." Année. 1 year later, the Blue Anchor diner was still there. Dawn had repaired the floor drain. The coffee machine behind the counter was the same one. Table 7 was still against the window where it always was. She walked in on a Tuesday evening in November and sat in the corner booth. His booth, the one with the back to the wall and the sightline to every entrance, and ordered coffee. He arrived at 7:15, without a security detail. Or rather, with one that had learned over the past year to operate at enough remove that it wasn't visible to ordinary observers. She had learned to feel them anyway. He sat down across from her. She pushed the second coffee cup toward him. He picked it up and wrapped both hands around it and looked at her across the table. 1 year, she said. 1 year. She looked around the diner, at the same cracked tables, the same laminated menus, the same quality of light that made everything look slightly more real than the outside world. "I used to think I was invisible here," she said. "You were never invisible," he said. "You were just in a room where nobody was paying the right kind of attention." She looked at him. "And now," he said, "you are the most visible person in every room you enter, and the most dangerous. Dangerous. To every contract structure that's designed to hide something. To every person who's counting on nobody looking carefully." He held her gaze. "You are the thing they didn't plan for." She picked up her coffee. "A waitress with a law degree. A woman," he said, "who sees what other people don't. Who speaks when other people won't. Who stays when other people leave." A pause. "Who walked up to my table with a coffee pot and changed the direction of my life." She set her cup down. She reached across the table. He took her hand. They sat in the corner booth of the Blue Anchor Diner on a Tuesday night in November, with the city of Chicago moving outside and the coffee getting cold, and the particular quiet of two people who have found each other in the specific way that only happens when neither of them was looking for it. Outside, the rain started. The same kind of rain as a year ago. Cold, heavy, the kind that makes the city feel like it's trying to wash itself clean. Lena Parker did not think about the bus stop on 5th with no shelter. She did not think about the backed-up drain in the break room, or the uniform she folded and left on a table and never picked up again. She did not think about the years of carrying coffee cups through a room where nobody saw her. She thought about her mother saying, "Here's what we're going to do." She thought about a clause in Section 7. She thought about the specific quiet electricity of a mind that has found the problem it was built to solve. She thought about a sentence she had spoken into a silent restaurant 1 year ago, with her heart hammering and her hands not entirely steady, and the absolute certainty that she couldn't walk away from what she saw. "Sir, this contract is a trap." 4 words, and everything that followed from them. She looked at the man across the table, the man who had built an empire and lost his way inside it and been found again by the one person nobody counted. The man who read every document she gave him with complete attention and said exactly what he meant, and had sent someone to watch her brother before she knew there was anything to watch him from. She had seen him from the beginning, the real thing underneath all of it, and he had seen her. And seeing each other clearly and honestly and without the comfortable distance of pretending not to notice, that was the foundation. That was the thing that held. Lena Parker had not risen because she married power. She had risen because she refused to let the world's opinion of what she was allowed to be determine what she actually became. She had started with the coffee pot and the courage to speak. She had built the rest with her own hands, one honest word at a time. And the woman who was once invisible in the corner of a forgotten diner had become in the end the one person in the city that no one, not the powerful, not the corrupt, not the afraid, could afford to overlook.